Chapter 1248. Wang Zhen shook his head. In this period of time, I've only seen His Highness the King of Song twice, and each time, we didn't have much time to converse. Wang Chong deeply frowned at his big uncle's words. From the moment he had received the imperial edict in Khorasan, Wang Chong had been pondering this entire matter. His apparent demotion, the withdrawal of the army from Khorasan, and the stripping of his military authority, even if someone wanted to do this, they should have never passed. The King of Song, his big uncle Wang Zhen, Minister of War Zhangqiu Jianqiong, Yang Zhao and the consort Taizhen behind him, his grandfather Duke Jiu's enormous influence in the court, the assistance of the other civil and military officials, and the favor of the Holy Emperor. All of this was like an invisible barrier that kept out all malice. This was also why Wang Chong had been able to fight in peace. But even with this sturdy barrier, an imperial edict had been passed, stripping Wang Chong of his military authority and turning everything Wang Chong had worked so hard to build up for the Tang dynasty into nothing. Wang Chong had never imagined this, and the strangest thing about this entire matter was the King of Song's attitude. After this incident, Wang Chong had believed that he would quickly receive a letter from the King of Song and learn of the cause and effect of this matter. This way, he would at least know what had happened. But after this incident, more than half a month had passed from Khorasan to the capital, and yet the King of Song had not sent a single letter. This matter was far too strange. Just what happened in the imperial court that day? Wang Chong thought for a few moments before finally asking the question he most wanted to know. In the entire royal court, if he couldn't get the answer he wanted from the King of Song, the only one who could possibly tell him was Big Uncle Wang General. As a high official of the first rank in the imperial court. His eldest uncle's position was not as high as that of the three dukes, but he definitely had access to a lot of secret information about the imperial court. Back then, Wang Chong had already asked Big Uncle Wang Zhen about it. However, First Uncle had said it very vaguely, almost not revealing any information. He only said that everything would be discussed after Wang Chong returned. Now, the time was finally right. Sigh. Unexpectedly, upon hearing Wang Chong's words, Wang Zhen's brows furrowed deeply. A hint of worry appeared on his composed face. Chong, I can't answer your question right now. Too many things had happened during this period of time. I've been in the court for 20 years, and I've weathered many storms and waves, but none can compare to this turmoil. There are many things that I can't even explain to you. Even now, I still don't know how the imperial edict was passed. Just what happened in the imperial court that day, I also want to know. Wang Zhen's words left Wang Chong flabbergasted. Big Uncle, just what happened? Why don't you know? Wang Chong's brow deeply creased. Wang Chong had never imagined that someone of his big uncle's status would be unaware of such a major event. Chong, let me finish and you'll understand. Wang Zhen leaned back against the carriage, a bitter smile in his eyes. There was something wrong with this matter from the very start. Chong, you might not know this, but I wasn't even in the imperial court when that incident occurred. I wasn't even involved in the final decision. Wang Chong's eyes flashed. Buzz. Wang Zhen's words left Wang Chong's heart in shock. At this moment, countless thoughts flew through Wang Chong's mind. Given his big uncle's status as a first-rank official, no ordinary person could transfer him out of the capital. Moreover, his big uncle was an important representative of the Wang clan in the imperial court. If Wang Chong wanted to deal with Wang Chong, he would have to transfer his big uncle. And based on his big uncle's words, he hadn't even been in the capital when that incident occurred. Wang Chong was confident that this was no simple coincidence. This looked more like a well-prepared and meticulously planned trap. Wang Zhen clearly understood this, and an almost imperceptible hint of worry appeared on his brow. Many things could only be discovered when the time came, but by that time, it would already be too late. Before the incident, I received news that a disaster had struck the Jiangnan province, and the people were rioting. Many fields and houses had been destroyed, and the local officials were unable to deal with it. Coupled with the petitions of the people, the imperial court discussed this matter. Although everyone believed that the Tang dynasty was flourishing and that the Jiangnan province would not be in much danger, when it came to the livelihood of the people, this was no small matter. Thus, A high-ranking official had to be dispatched to pacify the area and take charge of the situation. After some discussion, it was decided that I would be dispatched. Wang Zhen slightly raised his head, a look of reminiscence in his eyes. Although I was rather surprised, this involved the people and was part of my duty, so I had to take responsibility. Thus, I set off for the Jiangnan province. At the time, the king of Song was also in court. Neither I nor the king of Song thought much about it, because even if it wasn't me, there would definitely be someone else. But when I arrived at the Jiangnan province, I discovered that everything was completely different from what I had heard from the imperial court. A flood truly did occur in the Jiangnan province, but the disaster had already been pacified, and all the people had been dealt with appropriately. In addition, the disaster was far less serious than we had imagined, and there were no riots or petitions from the victims. The cause was the dereliction of duty of the clerk who had written the memorial. Without even carefully investigating the matter, he casually wrote the memorial, leading to the disaster. That clerk had already been dealt with, and the principal local officials had all resigned. All of this had already been taken care of by the time I arrived. It was also at this time that I received the news that the imperial court had approved the edict. Wang Chong said nothing, his face slowly turning gloomy. As the carriage rumbled along, big Uncle Wang Zhen's voice continued to ring in his ears, this time with a gravity that had not been there before. From the moment I received the news, I felt that something was wrong and rushed back to the capital. But in just a short period of time, the entire imperial court has undergone a great change. Many of the officials I used to know have disappeared, but there are many new faces that I have never seen before. Did Big Uncle not investigate their backgrounds? The imperial court is no small matter. Without outstanding achievements or talent, it's very difficult to enter it. Wang Chong suddenly interjected. From a minor official to a high-ranking official of the imperial court, many people would need to spend their entire lives studying and studying in order to reach this level. And for even more people, the Great Hall of the Imperial Palace, the place where the empire's authority was concentrated, was a place that they would never be able to dream of in their entire lives. Wang Chong had fought so many battles and rendered so many meritorious deeds, but all he possessed was military authority. When it came to the politics of the imperial court, he was only given the title of advisor-in-waiting. I've investigated it. Although their appearance was rather abrupt, their backgrounds are impeccable. They either have local officials or have made many meritorious deeds in the past, but they've always kept their achievements to themselves. It was only recently that they finally erupted and submitted their memorials to the imperial court. How could this be? Wang Chong's brow fiercely rose. The Tang dynasty had long since established a bureaucratic system of examination and selection. It was impossible for someone to accumulate so many meritorious deeds without reporting them to their superiors. This may sound possible in theory, but it will never happen in practice. I had my suspicions at the start as well, but later events proved that the meritorious deeds listed in the imperial court's memorials were true. Wang Zhen bitterly smiled. After sitting in the imperial court for so many years, it was impossible for anyone to fool him with tricks. But it was precisely because he had investigated the matter that Wang Zhen found it increasingly difficult to refute it. The carriage was deathly silent. After a long while, Wang Chong's voice suddenly rang out. Big Uncle didn't check their records? Chong, you truly are smart. Wang Zhen sighed. Their resumes are indeed impeccable. All their identities and backgrounds are perfect. However, I've checked their files, and all the papers used in the files are brand new. If a complete file is real and effective, the paper used to record the files can't be so brand new. These people schemed so meticulously, and this is probably the only flaw they left behind. This is something that no method can make up for. Even a wise man would make a mistake. No matter how perfect one's resume was, there would still be flaws. Time was the only thing that could not be faked. Just as Wang Chong was speaking, the carriage suddenly jolted. At the same time, Coachman's voice came from outside. "Old master, we've arrived." In an instant, Wang Chong and Wang Zhen came to their senses. Pushing open the carriage door, the two of them walked out. Outside the carriage, a familiar residence appeared before their eyes. This was Big Uncle Wang Zhen's residence. Wang Chong and Wang Zhen no longer discussed the matters of the imperial court. With a wave of his sleeve and an indifferent expression, he walked into the residence as if he was meeting a relative. In the residence, Wang Chong paid his respects to Big Aunt Xing and Cousin Wang Li. After spending a few moments in the residence, he quickly left. Everything seemed perfectly normal. After leaving his big uncle's residence, Wang Chong headed straight for the King of Song's residence. There were far too many suspicious points in this matter, and only one person could answer those questions in Wang Chong's heart. It was the King of Song. As a member of the imperial family of the Tang dynasty, as well as an important figure in the imperial court, the King of Song was at the center of this entire affair. Every upheaval, every political storm, almost always involved King Song. Halt! Who goes there? Before Wang Chong had even gotten close to the dignified and solemn gate of the King Song residence, he heard a furious roar as two fully armored guards at the gate stepped forward to stop Wang Chong. The two crossed their spears, and their expressions were sharp and menacing. The King of Song residence does not allow entry to unauthorized personnel. Don't you know this? Hurry up and leave. Seeing the two guards before him, Wang Chong's face darkened. He had come to the King of Song residence many times, but he had never been stopped. Moreover, Wang Chong had never seen these two guards before. I am the King of Foreign Lands, Wang Chong. I have come to pay my respects to His Highness the King of Song. Please send a message for me. Wang Chong took in a deep breath and quickly calmed down. Chapter 1249. In just a moment, a tall, burly, and imposing guard leader strode out from inside. His footsteps were heavy, and each step seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 caddies. The man first suspiciously examined Wang Chong, and then he quickly said, "His Highness is not present. His Highness is not present. King of Foreign Lands, please return." The guard captain's voice was crisp and efficient, and he immediately gestured for Wang Chong to be escorted out. Not present? Where did he go? Wang Chong asked. The King of Song never left the capital, and the capital was only so big. He couldn't have gone far. I don't know. In short, His Highness is not present. Please return. The guard captain had an indifferent expression. Since that's the case, let me see the old butler. Wang Chong said. Please go back. The guard captain said, his tone much more forceful this time. But Wang Chong did not argue. Instead, he strode toward the King of Song's residence. Everyone's expression changed when they saw this scene. Two guards raised their spears and aimed them at Wang Chong. The guard captain's expression chilled as he blocked Wang Chong's path. But when they saw the object in Wang Chong's hand, they all paled. The King of Song's token. One of the guards couldn't help but say. Wang Chong had taken out nothing but the token that the King of Song had given to Wang Chong during the War of the Southwest. All of you withdraw. At this moment, an elderly voice resounded in everyone's ears. Lord Butler. Upon hearing this voice, everyone immediately began to withdraw. At the same time, Wang Chong looked up and saw a familiar figure standing in front of the main gate of the King of Song's mansion, clad in a black robe. It had been more than half a year since they last met. The old butler was as healthy as ever, but there was a hint of vicissitudes between his brows. The old butler stood above and finally spoke slowly. Wang Chong, come in. This time, no one stopped Wang Chong. Even the other guards who sensed the commotion at the gate retreated. Wang Chong walked through the entire mansion and walked up the tall stairs, finally stopping in front of the old butler. Old butler, long time no see. Wang Chong bowed respectfully, just like the first time he met the old butler. You really haven't changed at all. A smile finally appeared on the old butler's troubled face. The current Wang Chong had far surpassed him in terms of martial arts, strength, and status. But he was still as humble and courteous as before. This was also what the old butler felt gratified about. I heard that you had returned to the capital. I expected that you would come. Follow me. The old butler glanced at Wang Chong, then quickly turned around and walked into the main hall. Wang Chong followed closely behind him. The main hall was quiet, as if they had entered another world. The old butler sat down in the hall, picked up an exquisite teapot on the table, and poured a cup for Wang Chong and himself. Wang Chong glanced at it. The tea in the cup was still hot and steaming. Clearly he had expected this. Wang Chong was silent for a moment, then sat down beside the old butler. Wang Chong, I know that you must have many doubts, but the guards at the door did not lie to you. The King of Song is indeed not here. The old butler placed the teapot back on the table and spoke slowly. Hearing this, Wang Chong did not say anything, but his brows twitched slightly. He looked into the old butler's eyes. The old butler's expression was the same as when Wang Chong had first met him. In that instant, Wang Chong immediately knew that the old butler was not lying. Where did the King of Song go? It seemed like only a moment, but also like countless long centuries. Wang Chong took a sip of the fragrant tea in his cup and suddenly spoke. I can't answer you, but His Highness does indeed have something he needs to do. The old butler said softly. That matter? His Highness is actually more confused than you are, and he is even more unwilling to allow such a resolution to be passed. His Highness has always been in the pro-war faction in the court. Be it you, Duke Jiao, or your father, everyone understands this. But why is it that I have sent so many letters to the King of Song, but he has never replied to me? Tell me, what on earth is going on? If the King of Song has his own difficulties, then tell me, what is it that he is afraid of? Wang Chong said in a low voice. This time, the old butler did not speak. He only picked up the teapot on the table and slowly poured himself a cup. The tea in the teapot clinked against the porcelain cup. Amidst the silence, the old butler finally spoke again. Wang Chong, His Highness also has his difficulties. I can only tell you that in a few days, His Highness will definitely give you an answer. But before that, His Highness still needs to understand one thing. Only then will he be able to answer all your questions. With that last sentence, the old butler looked at Wang Chong with an incomparably deep gaze. Wang Chong looked at the old butler and fell into a long silence. He seemed to have understood something. I understand. Putting down the teacup in his hand, Wang Chong flicked his sleeves and finally stood up. He then quickly walked out. Wang Chong, aren't you going to ask about what happened that day? This time, it was the old butler's turn to be surprised. There's no need. Wang Chong's voice echoed in the main hall. Before his voice faded away, he had already walked out of the main hall. Outside the main hall, the sun shone brightly and the spring wind blew on his face, reflecting the chaos in Wang Chong's eyes. In the end, Wang Chong still did not manage to meet the King of Song, nor did he get the answer he wanted. But no matter what, the King of Song had sent the old butler to tell him that he would get an answer in a few days. At least he had an explanation. Outside the main street, the crowd was surging. Wang Chong thought for a moment and was walking in the direction of his home when he suddenly heard an unfamiliar voice. Sir, do you need a carriage? There's no need. Wang Chong didn't even think about it as he continued forward, but he quickly heard a voice at his ear. But didn't my lord already promise my master that when dragons and tigers meet, you should drink a cup? Buzz! Wang Chong's face flickered as he turned his head. At first glance, Wang Chong saw the coachman in the carriage. He was wearing a green hat, the brim of which was pulled down so low that it was impossible to see his face. He was sitting at the front, driving a simple and unadorned carriage. There was nothing special about the carriage, and it was almost identical to the ones used by merchants in the capital. But when his eyes flitted over a unique mark on the wheels, Wang Chong's eyebrows couldn't help but twitch. Then let me have a ride. Wang Chong quickly regained his composure, and with a wave of his sleeve, he stepped onto the carriage. Hiya! Without a word, the coachman drove the carriage into the surging stream of people, mixing with the other carriages in the capital. After traveling through the streets and alleys for an hour, the carriage finally arrived at the Minister of War's residence. The moment Wang Chong stepped off the carriage, people from the Minister of War's residence rushed forward to conceal Wang Chong and escort Wang Chong into the residence. The carriage on the street only paused for a few moments before continuing on its way, making its way through the capital. Boom! As soon as Wang Chong stepped into the hall, the door behind him rumbled shut. At the same time, many candles lit up on the walls of the hall. The Minister of War's residence seemed to be preparing to face a formidable foe. Wang Chong silently watched all this, his face unperturbed, but his heart skipped a beat before quickly returning to normal. Lord Zhangqiu, Wang Chong called out. He quickly raised his head and began to walk toward that familiar mountainous figure. Across from Wang Chong was a figure dressed in casual clothes, his hands solemnly standing. It seemed like he had been waiting for some time. Wang Chong, you finally come. Upon seeing Wang Chong, Zhangqiu Jianqiong gave a long sigh of relief, his entire body seeming much more relaxed. Lord Zhangqiu, has the situation in the capital already reached such a dire state? Even someone of milord's status as the Minister of War needs to be so secretive. As Wang Chong spoke, he walked over. If one didn't know, no one would believe that the Minister of War of the Tang dynasty, one of the most authoritative figures in the world, Zhangqiu Jianqiong, would use a secret method like a slip of paper to deliver a message to him at the city gate. Not only that, Zhangqiu Jianqiong had also prepared the carriage that he had used. The Minister of War's residence was so heavily guarded that it didn't seem like the residence of a high-ranking official of the imperial court, but more like that of a frontier expedition. Wang Chong, if you had seen the changes in the capital like I have, you wouldn't say that. These are troubled times, and the imperial court is completely different from what you knew. Zhangqiu Jianqiong sighed, and then he pointed a finger at a black sandalwood table. There was not a single person in the hall, not even maids or servants. Zhangqiu Jianqiong picked up the teapot on the table and poured a cup for himself and Wang Chong. Then, he raised the cup and took a sip, a bitter expression on his face. Wang Chong sat down and glanced at Zhangqiu Jianqiong's profile. After more than half a year, Zhangqiu Jianqiong appeared to have aged a great deal, and there were many wrinkles at the corners of his eyes and face. It seemed like he had a lot on his mind. Zhangqiu Jianqiong was a top-class martial artist, already at the peak of the Saint Martial realm, an imperial great general. Wang Chong found it very difficult to believe that such a person had aged so much in such a short time. Lord Zhangqiu, just what happened that day? Why did the imperial court turn out like this? The Bureau of Military Personnel is the core of the world's mobilization of soldiers. Any mobilization of soldiers, including appointments, cannot bypass the Bureau of Military Personnel. They could not bypass you and directly issue that order, so my lord, I could only look for you. A long sigh resounded through the hall at Wang Chong's words. It seems like Wang Zhen has already told you a few things. Zhangqiu Jianqiong had a complicated expression. Chapter 1250. What? Wang Chong's body trembled in shock at these words. Now that I think about it, many things had been wrong since the morning court session. Usually, regardless of whether the court session was in session or not, I would have received news early in the morning, but I didn't receive any news that day. It wasn't until noon that someone came to inform me to prepare for the morning court session, and it wasn't the usual eunuch of the palace either. By the time I arrived, the court was in a hubbub. The session had already been going on for quite some time. Only then did I realize that other than myself, all the other officials were doing as usual. Zhangqiu Jianqiong continued, his head slightly raised, his breathing ragged, a complicated look in his eyes. Even after half a month had passed, some things were still very strange in retrospect. It was as if there was an invisible hand controlling everything, making it hard for them to breathe. The Minister of War was the center of authority in the military, his status even above that of a great general on the border. He controlled all the soldiers in the world and was a true titan of the empire. Even the officials had to be wary of him. Zhangqiu Jianqiong had never imagined that anyone, or any faction, would be so bold as to play tricks on this matter. There was something strange about the court session that day. If I hadn't been in the court, I wouldn't have been able to sense it. A look of reminiscence appeared on Zhangqiu Jianqiong's face as he continued to speak. He had hidden these matters in his heart this entire time, not telling anyone. If the person he was listening to hadn't been Wang Chong, he would never have said a single word. By the time I arrived at the court, the decision had already begun, and the court was in an uproar. At the start, just like everyone else, I felt that the matter was absurd and impossible to pass. But the development of the matter was completely different from what I imagined. In the past, I would discuss this matter with your big uncle. Your big uncle and I wouldn't even need to discuss this matter. Sometimes, we could understand each other's intentions with a single glance. But I quickly realized that your big uncle wasn't present. Moreover, the direction of the discussion was completely wrong, as if it was being controlled by an invisible hand. The originally impossible matter suddenly became more and more likely to pass. The King of Song and I immediately sensed that something was wrong. After all, our three sides had formed an alliance for quite some time. Since there is such a proposal, we are not too worried. Because the possibility of passing was still very low. But when it came time for the final vote, something that the King of Song and I didn't expect happened. Zhangqiu Jianqiong sighed deeply. Sometimes, there were some things that didn't need to be said in detail. Just a long sigh was enough to reveal too much. Even though Wang Chong hadn't participated in the court assembly that day, from the few words that Zhangqiu Jianqiong had said, Wang Chong could already sense the intense emotions that had gripped him that day. What the hell happened? Wang Chong could not help but ask. The King of Song and I anticipated everything, but we didn't foresee that the civil officials in the court who had always been on good terms with us, our own people, would all betray us at the critical moment. Zhangqiu Jianqiong said. Boom! Hearing this, Wang Chong's body shook violently, and his eyes finally revealed an extremely shocked expression. Zhangqiu Jianqiong didn't say anything, and neither did Wang Chong. The entire hall immediately fell into a deathly stillness. Zhangqiu Jianqiong's words caught Wang Chong by surprise. A civil official, and one who had always been on good terms with the King of Song, the Wang clan, and Zhangqiu Jianqiong at that. Wang Chong could already empathize with how Zhangqiu Jianqiong felt that day. He also understood why the atmosphere in the capital was so treacherous, and why Zhangqiu Jianqiong had to meet him in such a manner. The two of them fell into deep thought. Actually, if that's all, it would be fine. But that's not what I'm worried about. After a long while, Zhangqiu Jianqiong's voice sounded once more, breaking the silence. Even though the situation that day was strange, even if all the civil officials who had been on our side betrayed us, it still wouldn't have been enough to pass such a resolution. What I'm truly worried about is still the Holy Emperor. What? Hearing these words, Wang Chong's face warped. He abruptly raised his head. Lord Zhangqiu, what do you mean by this? Wang Chong, you don't understand. It doesn't matter who is pulling the strings behind the scenes, what they want to do, even if they mobilize all the civil officials to betray us, it doesn't matter at all. Because what is truly important will always be His Majesty alone. Without His Majesty's approval, no resolution will be passed. Zhangqiu Jianqiong gave a long sigh. The affairs of the imperial court have always been filled with storms and storms. Although this matter is disadvantageous to our militarists, it's only a momentary setback. In truth, even if it were 10 times worse, I wouldn't be too flustered. But the Holy Emperor, he is the one who makes me the most uneasy. In all of the Central Plains, His Majesty is the greatest sovereign that I have ever known and met. It is precisely his lofty aspirations and determination that united the strength of all the people and allowed him to pacify the world and sweep through the lands, bringing the Central Plains to an unprecedented level of prosperity. It is precisely because of him that we imperial great generals can wholeheartedly fight on the border, vowing to repay him with our lives. But His Majesty, I don't know what happened, but I'm certain that there's something wrong with His Majesty. There's something wrong with the Holy Emperor, far too wrong. This is what I'm truly worried about. Zhangqiu Jianqiong's brow deeply creased, his entire being burdened with worry. His Majesty the Holy Emperor was publicly acknowledged as the #1 man in the world, whether it was in terms of governance or martial arts. Even now, Zhangqiu Jianqiong had no idea what had happened to the Holy Emperor. Buzz! While Zhangqiu Jianqiong was still perplexed, Wang Chong felt like a boulder weighing 10,000 tons had been thrown into his mind, sending massive waves surging through his body. Zhangqiu Jianqiong didn't understand what had happened to the Holy Emperor, but Wang Chong knew all too well. That failure to break into the divine martial realm had affected the Holy Emperor and the entire Tang dynasty. Don't tell me that thing. Don't tell me it started so soon. Wang Chong's heart was heavy. Now that he thought about it, Wang Chong had actually sensed something from his first meeting with the Holy Emperor. Could it be that, while he was on the Western expedition, the Holy Emperor's condition had worsened to this extent? Wang Chang's heart instantly sank. As a subject, he could not criticize his sovereign, much less the Holy Emperor. Wang Chong was sure that Zhangzhou Jianqiong had sensed something. Wang Chong, this matter is far from as simple as you think. The capital appears calm on the surface, but undercurrents are surging beneath the surface. Your transfer back from Khorasan and your apparent demotion are only the tip of the iceberg. Moreover, your edge is too sharp, and your battles with Arabia are practically unprecedented. Right now, the Eastern and Western Turkic Khaganates, the Goguryeo Empire, Nanzhao, and even Uzan have all received a massive shock and have once more developed a reverence for the Tang dynasty. But it's precisely because of this that the tallest tree in the forest is the first to be blown down by the wind. You are currently the most dazzling existence in the military, and if they want to make an example of you against the militarists, they will definitely target you. I'm worried that the matter in Khorasan is only the beginning, so you must be extremely careful. Zhangzhou Jianqiong's expression was extremely grave. Throughout the Tang dynasty, Wang Chong could be said to be the youth that Zhangzhou Jianqiong most admired. The character and spirit he exuded, as well as his outstanding skill in the art of war, were the most outstanding of all the people Zhangzhou Jianqiong had ever seen. It was precisely for this reason that Zhangzhou Jianqiong wanted nothing to happen to him. This was also why he had appeared at the city gate. Buzz! Hearing Zhangzhou Jianqiong's words, Wang Chang's eyes narrowed and his face warped. He had never imagined that Zhangzhou Jianqiong would give him this note as a warning. He truly found it difficult to imagine what Zhangzhou Jianqiong, the Minister of War, could have to be so cautious about. Lord Zhangzhou, has the situation reached such a critical point? Wang Chong sternly said. Zhangzhou Jianqiong was known as the Tiger of the Empire, and this was a testament to his personality. Upon his return, Wang Chong had believed that Zhangzhou Jianqiong would at least be able to oversee the situation. He had never imagined that the situation in the capital would be far more serious than he had imagined. The situation might be even more serious than I said. Zhangzhou Jianqiong gravely stared at Wang Chong. Thump thump thump. Just as Wang Chong was about to pursue the matter, a series of heavy knocks sounded from the door. Hearing the knocks, Zhangzhou Jianqiong's face immediately warped, and Wang Chong also turned his head over. Who is it? Zhangzhou Jianqiong suddenly bellowed, and the atmosphere in the hall immediately turned heavy. Lord, there are people from the Bureau of Military Personnel outside. They say that they have an urgent matter that requires your attention tonight. The voice of an Annam Protectorate commander sounded from outside. Seated by the side, Wang Chong clearly saw Zhangzhou Jianqiong's complexion change rapidly. Rage, fear, indignation, and finally, a deep sense of helplessness. Then he slowly calmed down. In that instant, Wang Chong seemed to understand something, but he didn't say anything. Wang Chong, something has happened in the Bureau of Military Personnel. It seems like I won't be able to accompany you. Zhangzhou Jianqiong stood up, glanced at Wang Chong and hesitated. It seems like we'll have to talk another time. Wang Chong understands. Lord, you may go. Wang Chong also stood up. Some things didn't need to be said at all. Just a glance was enough to reveal too much information. Zhangzhou Jianqiong opened the door and left. Wang Chong watched as Zhangzhou Jianqiong boarded a green carriage. Both sides of the carriage were officials from the Bureau of Military Personnel that Wang Chong had never seen before. After Zhangzhou Jianqiong left, the two quickly boarded the carriage and left together with Zhangzhou Jianqiong. Wang Chong watched until Zhangzhou Jianqiong disappeared into the distance before walking out of the Minister of War's residence. Raising his head, Wang Chong glanced at the sky. It was already dusk and the lanterns were already lit. Is he already so busy? Chapter 1251. After leaving the Minister of War's residence, Wang Chong returned to his residence. Chong, you're finally back. The entrance to the Wang family residence was brightly lit, and Wang Chong's mother, Lady Zhao, and several maids had been waiting at the entrance. When she saw Wang Chong's thin appearance, she immediately pulled Wang Chong into her embrace and wept tears of joy. There was no mother in the world who did not love her child. No matter how awe-inspiring Wang Chong was in the outside world, whether he was made a king or a marquis in the eyes of a mother, he would always be a willful and mischievous child who needed her care. With the family reunited, Lady Zhao asked no questions. She only prepared a sumptuous dinner and watched as Wang Chong finished eating. After an uneventful night, Wang Chong returned to his room. The Wang clan's residence was like an invisible barrier, blocking all the storms and the disputes of the court outside its walls. Wang Chong did not want to bring the matters of the court to his home. Just what's going on? In the dead of night, Wang Chong sat cross-legged on his bed, his eyes half closed, his mind in turmoil. Everything, starting from Karasin, including the news he had received in Qixi, his meeting with Geshu Han, the people he had encountered at the gate of the capital, the events that had taken place, his conversation with his big uncle, the old butler, and Zhangqiu Jianqiong, had passed through Wang Chong's mind, each detail magnified countless times in Wang Chong's mind. Wang Chong suddenly thought of those 3 Confucian experts who had taken over his military authority in Karasin and the marks on their wrists. In a flash, Wang Chong seemed to think of something. Was it them? Could it be them? Wang Chong muttered to himself, vaguely understanding. But Wang Chong still had far too many doubts. Just as he was deep in thought, the sound of flapping wings suddenly came from the night sky, accompanied by the hooting of owls. Hearing this cry, Wang Chong instantly came back to his senses. "Come in." Wang Chong blinked his eyes and said calmly as he sat on the bed. It was quiet outside the room. Other than the sound of the night breeze, there was no other sound. But soon, just when people thought that there was no one outside, the door to Wang Chong's room suddenly opened, and a nimble figure suddenly jumped in from the gap. "Greetings, Marquis." Just 5 or 6 steps away from Wang Chong, the figure suddenly stopped. The figure was tall and burly, with a huge eagle perched on his left shoulder. His body was bent, and his expression was respectful. "The eagle, did you find anything?" Wang Chong suddenly said, revealing the other's identity. The person who had intruded into the Wang clan residence in the middle of the night was none other than the eagle that Wang Chong had left in the capital after the Southwest War. After Wang Chong went north to Wushang, he had rarely used the eagle, but this did not mean that the eagle was not important. On the contrary, the eagle had always been carrying out a mission according to Wang Chong's orders. On his return to the capital, the world was treacherous and fraught with danger. The first thing Wang Chong thought of was to recall the eagle and the newly trained intelligence squad. "Lord Marquis, according to your orders, from the moment you arrived at the gate of the capital to the moment you appeared, we placed many spies in the capital. Everything is under surveillance, including those unfamiliar officials. After Marquis left, we sent people to follow those insolent and secretive officials." The eagle sternly said, his body bowing. "Did you find out where they were staying? And their identity and background?" Wang Chong asked. The eagle hesitated for a moment, then finally shook his head. "No. Our people followed them, but it wasn't long before we lost contact with them, as if they had evaporated into thin air. These people were all top-class experts that I personally trained and are extremely experienced. When Marquis wasn't here, I took them to Biding and Yuzhou for training, and they all successfully completed their missions. They were just some minor officials, and in normal circumstances, they wouldn't have failed. Thus, when I received the news, I immediately began to investigate. Only now, after the Z period, did I find their corpses in the moat outside the city." Buzz. At the eagle's words, Wang Chong's eyes widened and his brow furrowed. Those 2 minor officials, especially the one who had provoked Wang Chong, seemed far too abnormal. Wang Chong had ordered the eagle to send people to follow them, but he hadn't expected this result. If there really was nothing wrong with them and they really were officials of the court, this sort of thing would never have happened. Where did the last clue lead to? Wang Chong was quiet for a few moments before he suddenly asked. "The eastern part of the city." The eagle respectfully replied. "I understand. You can leave." Wang Chong nodded. "Marquis, be at ease. No matter what, I will think of a way to find those 2 minor officials." The eagle took in the expression on Wang Chong's face and said solemnly. There was an undercurrent in the imperial court. A powerful force seemed to be deliberately targeting Marquis. They were so arrogant that they had even sent people to pretend to be officials to provoke and humiliate Wang Chong at the city gates. This news had already spread among Wang Chong's subordinates in the capital. This was something that Eagle and the others could not tolerate. Whoever dared to go against Wang Chong would be an enemy of all of them. I understand. Wang Chong waved his hand. Send someone to meet the family of the spy who was killed and give them a pension. If there are any difficulties in their family, try your best to help them. As for the rest, don't alert them for now. I have my own plans, Wang Chong said in a low voice. The eagle quickly left the room as quietly as he had come, not alerting anyone. The night quickly passed, and at dawn, while Wang Chong was still meditating in his room, his mother's maid rushed into Wang Chong's room with a red face. Young master, someone from the imperial court has come. The madam says that you must immediately see them. At the gate of the Wang family residence, Wang Chong met with the emissary from the imperial court. Marquis, please. Today is your wedding day. Please take a bath and change your clothes, and then come with us to meet His Divine Majesty. The Bureau of Rights has already prepared the documents. Once you meet His Divine Majesty, it will be announced to the world that you will be officially conferred the title of King of Foreign Lands. At the gate, an elderly eunuch dressed in embroidered robes had an elated look on his face. Behind him were the officials of the Golden Guards, the Imperial Army, the City Guard, the Bureau of Rights, and the Chamberlain of Dependencies. All of them had come to greet Wang Chong. Once one was conferred the title of King or Marquis, the ceremony would be announced to the world. Only after meeting with the Holy Emperor and receiving the approval of the Bureau of Rights could Wang Chong be considered the true king of foreign lands. This was the most basic ceremony for conferring the title of Marquis in the Tang dynasty. I'll have to trouble eunuchs. Wang Chong bathed and changed into the red ceremonial robe he had worn when conferring the title of Marquis. He quickly boarded the palanquin and set off for the imperial palace. It was still early, and only a little light had begun to peek out from the east, but the streets were already packed with people. All the people who had heard the news were lining the streets to welcome him. They had lived in the capital for a long time, and they were well aware of the customs of conferring titles to Marquis. The young Marquis is going to see the Holy Emperor for his conferment. You're still talking about the young Marquis? He's already the king of foreign lands. The first king of a different surname conferred by the Tang dynasty. Haha, only a hero like this is worthy of the title of king of foreign lands. A great hero. This is a true hero of our Central Plains. Everyone look. Crowds gathered on both sides of the street, all of them brimming with enthusiasm and joy. The atmosphere was even livelier than during a festival. Yesterday's events at the city gate had already spread like the wind through the capital, and Wang Chong was like the noon sun in the capital. He's coming, he's coming. As Wang Chong was riding on the palanquin, the crowd in front of him began to excitedly yell. Sitting in the palanquin, Wang Chong had yet to react when he heard a massive boom. Boom! Amidst the deafening cheers, a resplendent firework suddenly soared into the sky. Under the first rays of the morning sun, the fireworks soared dozens of meters into the sky and violently exploded, turning into thousands of bright fireworks. Boom! The second firework followed, and then a third. In just a few seconds, the sky over the capital had become a sea of dazzling fireworks, attracting the attention of countless people. Amidst the earth-shattering explosion of fireworks, the sound of firecrackers could be heard. It wasn't just in one or two places, but all over the capital. King of foreign lands. King of foreign lands. As Wang Chong sat in his palanquin, his ears were filled with the deafening cheers of the people. In the last 100 years, the only person in the Tang dynasty who can receive such love and respect from the people is the young Marquis. As the commoners lined the streets to welcome Wang Chong, the silver-robed eunuch at the front turned to look at the palanquin on which Wang Chong was riding, a look of envy on his face. The Golden Guards escorting Wang Chong also had respectful looks on their faces. The achievements that Wang Chong had established in the West were precisely what all men and soldiers dreamed of. In a flash, everyone's backs became even straighter. Wang Chong sat motionless in his palanquin, sensing everything. As he listened to the tide of cheers, Wang Chong mentally gave a long sigh. The people of the capital still knew nothing and were completely unaware of the impending danger, but this was precisely why they were so adorable. Wasn't this the reason why Wang Chong had fought with all his might and had sent generation after generation of generals to the front lines and shed their blood for this very reason? Amidst the deafening cheers of the common people, Wang Chong's sedan chair passed through the streets and finally entered the imperial palace. Rumble. As the two massive golden gates of the palace slammed shut, all sound was cut off. It was like he had gone from one world to another. Chapter 1252. What's going on? Wang Chong's brow creased as he came back to his senses and looked ahead. There's someone blocking the way. The silver-robed eunuch leading the way said in a trembling voice. Buzz. Wang Chong's expression flickered as he raised his head. A moment later, Wang Chong sensed a powerful aura 50 to 60 paces in front of him, blocking his path. Wang Chong had originally believed that this was one of the commanders of the imperial army patrolling the palace, but it now appeared that this was not the case at all. But this was not what Wang Chong was concerned about. The imperial palace was a sacred land, not a place to be trifled with. For this person to dare to block him in a place like this, especially when he was about to enter the palace to meet the divine emperor, was simply audacious. No ordinary person would dare to do such a thing. King of foreign lands, will you not come out to meet me? A dignified and authoritative voice suddenly sounded from outside. It carried the air of a superior, and in that instant, Wang Chong could clearly feel the breathing of the chamberlains of imperial insignia in the surroundings, including the eunuch leading them. As though mice meeting a cat, a deep sense of fear appeared in their eyes. Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong raised a hand, parted the curtain, and walked out of the palanquin. Raising his head, he saw a figure standing in the distance, dressed in a four-clawed robe embroidered with clouds, his entire body exuding boundless majesty. Wang Chong had never seen this person before, but based on the resemblance between this person and the holy emperors, Wang Chong was able to quickly identify him. The first prince. Wang Chong couldn't help but widen his eyes at the sight of this figure. He had only been back in the capital for a day, and yet he was meeting the first prince in this manner. The first prince's calm and unruffled appearance clearly indicated that he had expected Wang Chong to pass through this alley and had been waiting for him. King of foreign lands, it truly isn't easy to meet you. The eldest prince's gaze was like lightning, and he strode forward with a majestic gait. The moment Wang Chong appeared, he strode forward. It was also at this moment that Wang Chong's gaze darted around. He suddenly realized that within a radius of several hundred steps, all the imperial guards, and imperial guards had all disappeared in an instant. At this moment, the surroundings were deathly silent. The atmosphere suddenly became incomparably tense. Around the palanquin, the silk-robed eunuch and the accompanying chamberlain of imperial insignia all had pale faces. Their heads hung low as they trembled in fear, as though they were dead men. In the depths of the palace, it was taboo for a prince to meet the ministers of the court, not to mention that Wang Chong was not an ordinary minister. If this scene were to spread out, it would definitely have a great impact. It was even possible that they would be silenced. More importantly, the first prince was the eldest son of the first wife, the future crown prince, and the legitimate successor of the Tang dynasty. If there were no accidents, he would be the future emperor of the Tang dynasty. One could imagine the consequences of offending the first prince in the depths of the palace. Relax. Given the first prince's breadth of mind, I'm confident that he won't make things difficult for you. Wang Chong's eyes flashed as he walked forward. Whether it was a blessing or a curse, he could not avoid it. Ever since his reincarnation, Wang Chong had been intentionally or unintentionally avoiding the first prince, and even his big uncle had been influenced by him, slowly distancing himself from the first prince. But even after avoiding for so long, he could no longer avoid the first prince. Wang Chong could avoid the first prince, but he could not prevent the first prince from seeking him out. Moreover, Wang Chong was rather curious to know what the first prince was up to. Paying respects to your highness. Wang Chong walked over, stopped 3 or 4 steps away from the first prince, and bowed in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. "Ha, the king of foreign lands is truly benevolent. As long as they don't speak carelessly, why would I make things difficult for these servants?" The first prince indifferently said as he gazed at Wang Chong. This was the first prince's first time examining Wang Chong. Although he had heard many legends about Wang Chong, and his aides had shown him drawings of Wang Chong, the first prince couldn't help but sigh when he saw the real person. In the War of the Southwest, he had led more than 1,000 clan experts to the southwest, ultimately turning the tide and killing hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the Mengshi Yusang army. And soon after, he had campaigned north and south, waging 2 large-scale wars and annihilating the 1 million elite cavalry of the various worlds. All of this could only be described as a miracle. The so-called war god was nothing more than this. But who could have imagined that the one who had accomplished all these feats was a youth of 17 or 18? What a pity! If I had known that the youngest son of the Wang clan was so talented, I would have used Wang Zhen from the very beginning to pull the Wang clan over. The first prince mentally wrung his hands. If he had had his assistance, all these achievements would have gone to him, and no one would have been able to compete with him. While the first prince was observing Wang Chong was also observing the first prince. After all, he was a descendant of the Holy Emperor, and the first prince and the Holy Emperor shared some resemblance. Moreover, as the eldest prince of the Tang dynasty, the first prince had long ago begun to manage the affairs of the court. His body was brimming with dignity, and his every action exuded boundless authority. Just from his bearing, demeanor, and every word, one could see a part of the bearing of the Holy Emperor. Alas, as Wang Chong gazed at the first prince, he inwardly sighed. Others might not know, but Wang Chong was well aware that the first prince could never sit on the throne of the Holy Emperor. It was not because of 5th Prince Li Heng, but because his personality was simply not suitable. "Wang Chong, you are a talent. This king's greatest mistake was that I didn't personally try to rope you in. I have seen your talent in the art of war, and it is truly the #1 in the world. Not even Wang Zhongxi can compare to you. With your assistance, this king might have already ascended to the throne of the 9-5. Thus, this king has come this time to make up for this mistake, to give you a chance, and also to give this king a chance. Wang Chong, how about you come and assist this king?" The first prince's voice resounded through the palace alleys, causing the brocade-robed eunuchs and the other eunuchs to tremble in fear. The words 9-5, in particular, instantly caused their faces to pale, but no one dared to say anything, only lowering their heads even lower. The War of the Princes was a taboo matter on the part of the first prince trying to win over the king of foreign lands. If this matter was not handled properly, everyone present would be silenced. And if even a sliver of this matter was leaked, it would cause a massive storm in the imperial court. Everyone trembled in fear, not daring to say a single word. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. After what seemed like both a moment and like countless eons, Wang Chong's voice finally resounded through the palace. "I didn't think that your highness would think so highly of me, but I am afraid that your highness will be disappointed. Wang Chong is only an ordinary general who has only made some achievements on the battlefield. As for the matter that your highness speaks of, that is something that only the Holy Emperor can decide, not something that a general like Wang Chong can influence." As Wang Chong spoke, he bowed in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. "Impudent! Wang Chong, are you planning to refuse His Highness?" Suddenly, a stern voice rang out. Before the first prince could say anything, one of the first prince's guards behind him could not help but berate him. "Impudent! Zhou Xing, why haven't you withdrawn yet? Who do you think the king of foreign lands is to be so rude?" The first prince waved his hand and rebuked, but there was no hint of rebuke on his face. Wang Chong remained unmoved by this sight. Although Wang Chong had not encountered many of the methods these princes used to win over the hearts of the people, he was well aware of them. "Wang Chong, are you sure you don't want to reconsider? This king has personally come to see you to express my sincerity. When Duke Jiao pacified the rebellion in the War of the Princes, he performed a meritorious deed of ascending to the throne. Even now, when one thinks about it, one still feels envious. Wang Chong, if you can work with me, we can create an even greater golden age, expand our territory together, push the Tang dynasty to unprecedented heights, and continue the old story of Duke Jiao and the Holy Emperor. Wouldn't that be a beautiful tale? The first prince said, his expression impassioned. Even Wang Chong was slightly moved by the first prince's impassioned voice, but Wang Chong quickly regained his composure. Your Highness, you have misunderstood. A soldier's duty is to obey orders, and Wang Chong is a soldier of the Tang dynasty. If your Highness ascends to the throne of the Holy Emperor, Wang Chong will naturally obey your Highness's decree and place the interests of the Tang dynasty above all else. Wang Chong's expression was indifferent, not the slightest change in it. The first prince imperceptibly creased his brow as he stared at Wang Chong. Wang Chong's answer was confident, but it was not the answer he wanted. Wang Chong, this king doesn't like being rejected, but it seems like you're going to refuse the last chance this king is giving you. Wang Chong's eyes widened, but he quickly regained his composure. Your Highness, huh? But this time, before Wang Chong could finish speaking, the first prince waved his sleeve and interrupted Wang Chong. Wang Chong, this king understands your intentions. I only hope that you will not regret it. The first prince gave Wang Chong a deep glance, then turned and left. His final glance seemed to contain a deeper meaning. Wang Chong, this king knows that you are riding on the crest of success, but the moon still waxes and wanes, let alone a person. You really shouldn't have helped old Five. Several zhang away, the first prince suddenly stopped. With a cold snort, he vanished into the distance. Buzz! Wang Chong had originally been calm, but when he heard the first prince's final words, his entire face instantly paled. Old Five. In the entire imperial palace, the only person the first prince could call Old Five was fifth Prince Li Heng. Wang Chong had originally believed that few people knew that he was secretly helping fifth Prince Li Heng, but it now appeared that this was not the case. I didn't think that he would know everything like the back of his hand. Chapter 1253. The imperial palace was a treacherous place. There were no walls that could keep the wind out, no secrets that would last forever. This was why the War of the Princes had always been so dangerous and feared. His relationship with fifth Prince Li Heng would one day be exposed, but it was happening much faster than Wang Chong had expected. It seems like the fifth prince has already placed many spies at his side. Wang Chong raised his head, a glimmer of light in his eyes. A tall tree attracted the wind, and fifth Prince Li Heng was no longer the same as he was in the past. He had gathered many advisors to his side, but the more people he recruited, the more people there would be mixed in. This was unavoidable. As these thoughts flew through his mind, Wang Chong quickly returned to normal. Let's go! With a wave of his sleeve, Wang Chong quickly returned to the palanquin and sat down. Raise the palanquin. The silver-robed eunuch and the surrounding golden guards breathed a deep sigh of relief. The collapse of negotiations between Wang Chong and the first prince was undoubtedly a good thing for them. After all, nothing had happened. Otherwise, if a prince of the Tang dynasty and the king of foreign lands, favored by the Holy Emperor, were colluding with each other, a calamity would descend upon them. The palanquin quickly began to move forward. In the surroundings, the vanished imperial forest and imperial forest suddenly reappeared. Everything returned to normal as if nothing had happened. But within the palanquin, Wang Chong's heart was heavy. Has the situation in the palace already gotten this serious? To Wang Chong, the first prince's appearance was just a minor interlude. What truly worried him was the message behind this matter. It was a taboo for a prince to privately meet with an important minister. If not for the fact that the palace was in such chaos, the first prince would never have dared to do such a thing. Everything depends on the Holy Emperor. Wang Chong took a deep breath and quickly calmed down. In the eye of the storm in the empire, the most important thing would always be the Holy Emperor's attitude. Moreover, after such a long time, what Wang Chong wanted to know the most now was how the Holy Emperor's condition was. The palanquin moved forward quickly, passing through layers of palace walls and getting closer to the center of power of the entire Tang dynasty. A moment later, they stopped in front of a white jade stairway that had thousands of steps. Parting the curtain of the sedan, Wang Chong walked out. The security in front of him was extremely tight. Countless chamberlains of imperial insignia donned in golden battle armor stretched from the bottom of the imperial stairway all the way to the very top. Right in front of the golden palace, there were countless experts standing there. Waves of essence energy soared into the sky, causing people to feel intimidated at the sight of them. Pa! At this moment, the sound of a whip came from far away in front of the great hall. Declare! The young Marquis, Wang Chong, requests an audience. His firm voice lingered in the air, echoing throughout the hall. Wang Chong tidied up his clothes and quickly began to ascend the white jade stairway. This was not the first time Wang Chong had set foot on this stairway, but it felt very different this time. There were no observing ministers, no ceremonial music. All of this indicated that this audience was completely different from the past. After ascending the stairway, Wang Chong quickly arrived in front of the palace. Young Marquis, His Majesty is waiting for you in the hall. The chief eunuch holding the whip softly said, his expression respectful to Wang Chong. There was no one in the entire Tang dynasty who did not know of the new war god of the Tang dynasty, Wang Chong. Even these eunuchs deep in the palace had heard of his name. Many thanks, Gong Gong. Wang Chong bowed and brushed past the chief eunuch, quickly making his way toward the palace. Bzz. Wang Chong stopped in front of the pitch-black palace gate. As he gazed at the dazzling palace, Wang Chong's mind was in turmoil. When he had first arrived, his mind had been filled with countless questions and resentment, but as he stood in front of this massive palace, all these distracting thoughts were swept away, and Wang Chong's mind suddenly became tranquil. Wang Chong, come in. Right at this moment, a mellow, warm, and smooth voice suddenly sounded out from within the hall. Wang Chong immediately recognized the voice of eunuch Gao Lisher. Wang Chong quickly stepped over the threshold and into the palace. Boom! The instant he took a step forward, it was as if he had entered another world from one world. All sounds disappeared, and at the same time, that familiar aura once again swept over him. This was not the first time Wang Chong had entered this palace to have an audience with the Holy Emperor. The last time he had stood before the Holy Emperor, Wang Chong had felt like he was as insignificant as an ant. But after half a year, Wang Chong felt completely different. He was already close to the subtle realm, able to peer into that unfathomable realm. Even Kuteba had died at his hand, and the lofty great generals in the eyes of ordinary martial artists were no longer intimidating in his eyes. But the moment he stepped into the palace, Wang Chong had never imagined that he would still feel a deep sense of reverence from the depths of his heart. He felt like a child standing before a giant, humble and insignificant. If one said that Wang Chong was a giant standing on the summit of a mountain, then that incomparably noble figure in the hall was a god standing high in the clouds, looking down on the world. The higher his cultivation level, the more Wang Chong understood just how terrifying and powerful the Holy Emperor was. Divine Martial Realm. This thought flitted through Wang Chong's mind. The subtle realm was already an unfathomable existence. Wang Chong had experienced this power before and knew just how enormous it was, and the divine martial realm was above the subtle realm. The Holy Emperor of the past had been infinitely close to the divine martial realm, and Wang Chong found it very difficult to imagine just how terrifyingly powerful the Holy Emperor had become. Your humble servant kowtows to the Holy Emperor. Long live the Holy Emperor! Long live the Holy Emperor! Wang Chong lifted his robe, quickly lowered his head, and bowed respectfully. It was so quiet in the palace that one could hear a pin drop. Only the majestic aura was left, surging in the palace like a tide. After a long time, an extremely majestic voice, like that of a god, finally sounded from the depths of the palace. Rise! At that moment, the entire palace was trembling slightly. Thank you, Your Majesty! Wang Chong bowed and stood up. The palace was about 60 to 70 meters away, and the rules in the palace were strict. Without orders, no one was allowed to go forward. Wang Chong stood there and looked up slightly. The palace was empty, completely different from the heavily guarded appearance outside. Apart from the most noble figure in the world at the top of the palace, and eunuch Gao, who was dressed in embroidered clothes, there was no one else. There was not even a palace maid holding a circular fan and a mighty palace general with a giant axe standing at the back. Wang Chong couldn't help but have a strange feeling about this. But soon, Wang Chong's eyes were focused on the most noble and legendary emperor in the world at the top of the palace. Whether it was in the past or now, the figure in the palace would always be the most respected and admired existence in Wang Chong's heart. It was not because of his supreme status and power, but because he led the empire from chaos to order, reaching an unprecedented stage of prosperity. This was the real Holy Emperor. Buzz. As Wang Chong's mind was in turmoil, the Holy Emperor, dressed in his dragon robes, was seated on his massive throne. His right hand was resting on the dragon armrest, his forefinger lightly moving. In the next moment, Gao Lisher understood Qinxi's intentions, and his figure flashed as he opened an imperial edict and walked over. Wang Chong, hear the decree. Subject Wang Chong, hear the decree. Wang Chong quickly lowered his head and bowed. By the will of the heavens, the emperor declares. Young Marquis Wang Chong has protected the country and is young and promising. In the Battle of Talas and the Battle of Khorasan, he has rendered heroic service and raised the prestige of my Tang dynasty. Thus, with the approval of the Holy Emperor, the 6 bureaus have agreed to confer upon young Marquis Wang Chong the title of King of Foreign Lands of the Tang dynasty. He will enjoy the title of king, and his status will be the same as that of a member of the imperial family. In addition, the Bureau of Rights and the Bureau of Personnel will draft an official announcement to the world. Gao Lisher put away the imperial decree and gazed at Wang Chong, a gratified look on his face. He had almost single-handedly watched this youth grow up. During the regional commander's incident, when Wang Chong had been impeached by the Hu and imprisoned in the imperial prison, Gao Lisher had personally led a group of people to visit him and deliver pills to him. From that moment on, Gao Lisher knew that the sage emperor regarded this youth highly and doted on him. In truth, Wang Chong had not let down the Holy Emperor's favor. In just a little more than half a year, he had used a series of astonishing feats to prove that the Holy Emperor had not misjudged him. Wang Chong, come up and receive the decree. The hall was quiet, and to everyone's surprise, Wang Chong remained motionless, as if someone had used the petrification art on him. If it had only been a few moments, Gao Lisher would have believed that Wang Chong had not heard him clearly. But Wang Chong stood there with no intention of coming up. Young Marquis. Gao Lisher's expression changed slightly, and his voice suddenly rose a notch. Your Majesty, this subject has a memorial to make. At this moment, Wang Chong bowed to the hall, his loud voice echoing through the hall. Wang Chong, you dare. At the sight of this, Gao Lisher's expression changed drastically. The Holy Emperor had already announced Wang Chong's reward, but Wang Chong dared not to come forward and receive the decree, and he even had a memorial to make. He was clearly using this opportunity to blackmail the Holy Emperor. This was a major crime. This subject Wang Chong has a memorial to His Majesty. To Gao Lisher's surprise, Wang Chong acted like he hadn't heard, speaking even louder than before. Gao Lisher's face completely paled. It was obvious that Wang Chong had steeled his heart and no longer cared about the consequences. Speak! The Holy Emperor's dignified voice came from the hall, aloof and emotionless. It was as if he had long ago predicted that Wang Chong would ask this question. Arabia is a country of tigers and wolves, an eternal calamity to the Tang dynasty. The threat it poses is even greater than that of the barbarians bordering the Tang dynasty. And Khorasan is extremely important to resisting Arabia. This subject earnestly requests that Your Majesty rescind this decree. As Wang Chong spoke, he respectfully kneeled once more, remaining motionless on the floor of the hall. More than a year of planning, more than half a year of painstaking effort, an enormous investment of resources, and the sacrifice of tens of thousands of soldiers had finally won the Battle of Khorasan. No matter what, Wang Chong could not let these sacrifices be in vain, and he certainly could not allow the Arabs to rise again and wreak havoc on the Central Plains. The Tang dynasty was withdrawing, the alliance at Khorasan had collapsed, and the entire army was withdrawing. In the entire world, only the Holy Emperor could change all this. Chapter 1254. Buzz. As soon as Wang Chang's words fell, it was as if a boulder had been dropped into a lake, stirring up huge waves. In the great hall, Gao Lishi's expression had become extremely ugly. In the entire Tang dynasty, nothing was more turbulent than the conflict between militarists and Confucians. Now, the Confucians had the upper hand in the court. Gao Lishi had been most worried that Wang Chong would bring up this matter during this audience, but it had still happened. I understand. The Holy Emperor's voice came again from the great hall, without the slightest ripple of emotion. Your Majesty, the military is a matter of great importance to the country. It is the power of life and death, the principle of survival, and it cannot be ignored. The military is an important barrier for the Tang dynasty to defend against the surrounding barbarians. Once it is reduced, it will cause great chaos. I hope that Your Majesty will consider it clearly. Wang Chong said again. The great hall was quiet. Gao Lishi could no longer hold it in. Wang Chong, what are you doing? A ruler's orders are like a mountain, and a ruler cannot go back on his words. Since His Majesty has made a decision, it cannot be changed. Are you going against your superiors and blackmailing the Holy Emperor? Gao Lishi's expression was livid, and he was furious. In the entire Tang dynasty, from top to bottom, for decades, no one had ever dared to speak to the Holy Emperor in this way, and no one had dared to blackmail the Holy Emperor like Wang Chong. This was treason. Just this alone was enough for him to be sentenced to death. This was a great crime of disrespect. Your Majesty, your humble servant would not dare. Wang Chong said loudly, but there was no hint of retreat in his voice. The person before him was no ordinary ruler. His open-mindedness and wisdom were admired by the people of the world. His ambition and strategy were admired by the people of the world. His governance and martial arts were praised by the people of the world. More importantly, he had single-handedly created the current prosperous and powerful Tang dynasty. Back then, the Holy Emperor was able to make his grandfather do his best to assist him. Wang Chong believed that the current Holy Emperor was still the same king who cherished the world, who was wise and mighty, and who was also worthy of him following. Wang Chong, hurry up and get up. Gao Lishi was already trembling with anger because of Wang Chong. He had thought highly of Wang Chong just now, thinking that he was the most talented young man he had ever seen and that he did not disappoint the Holy Emperor's love for him. He did not expect that in such a short time he would become so muddle-headed. Wasn't this going against his career prospects? Enough! At this moment, a calm voice came from the side. The Holy Emperor waved his hand slightly and stopped Gao Lishi. Your Majesty! Gao Lishi quickly fell silent and lowered his head. Wang Chong, I have my own plans for this matter. The Holy Emperor looked down at Wang Chong and indifferently said. His voice naturally exuded an unquestionable tone. But, Your Majesty, Wang Chong lowered his head and still wanted to argue, but Gao Lishi could no longer watch. Wang Chong, you're impudent. He had always had a favorable impression of Wang Chong, but no matter what reason Wang Chong had, no matter how talented he was, or how much he had contributed to the empire, the Holy Emperor had clearly expressed his intentions. For Wang Chong to still dare to contradict him was simply audacious and deserved death. King of foreign lands, receive the decree. At this moment, the Holy Emperor's voice resounded in Wang Chong's ear, dignified, decisive, and unquestionable. These words ended the conversation and cut off all of Wang Chong's thoughts. Wang Chong stood there in a daze, his face as pale as a sheet of paper. On his way here, Wang Chong had thought of all sorts of possibilities. No matter what method he had to use, he had to find a way to change the Holy Emperor's mind. But he hadn't imagined that the Holy Emperor's attitude would be even more resolute than he had imagined. With just a few words, he had utterly destroyed all of Wang Chong's hopes. Wang Chong's face alternated between green and white, and he was speechless for a long time. Suddenly, at this moment, a clear and melodious sound of a bell resounded in the hall. Wang Chong had never heard such a sound before. It was sharp and thin, like strands of string. Moreover, although it sounded like a bell, it was also completely different. More importantly, this was the imperial palace's holy land, where the holy emperor resided. Wang Chong could not think of anyone who would dare to disturb the holy emperor's hearing in this place. But what surprised Wang Chong the most was the reaction of the holy emperor and Gao Lisher in the hall. When the bell rang, Wang Chong could clearly see that Gao Lisher's face had paled, and he seemed rather flustered. And the holy emperor's aura had also begun to ripple. At this moment, Wang Chong could clearly sense that the holy emperor's aura had become somewhat disordered. However, in an instant, that aura disappeared without a trace, as if it had been suppressed by something. "Your Majesty," Wang Chong's heart chilled, and his face paled as he thought of something. "King of foreign lands, let's end things here for today. The holy emperor is also rather tired. If you have any questions, we can talk about them next time." Gao Lisher suddenly said. Although he tried his best to remain calm, his voice still unconsciously revealed a sense of urgency and anxiousness. He was no longer as calm as he was before. The mood in the imperial court suddenly became rather strange, completely different from before. Wang Chong froze, countless thoughts flitting through his mind. Wang Chong still wanted to say something, but the holy emperor lightly waved his finger, indicating that he should leave. "King of foreign lands, let's go. Zejia will send you off." At the same time, Gao Lisher, dressed in embroidered robes, walked out of the hall. Wang Chong mentally gave a long sigh. No matter how unwilling he was, he could only leave the hall. If he continued, he would be disobeying his superior. Not only would he be of no help, he would only end up making things worse. This lowly subject receives the decree. Wang Chong gave a deep bow. "King of foreign lands, Zejia can understand your feelings, but the present is different from the past. You are now the king of foreign lands of the Tang dynasty, the first true king of the Tang dynasty with a different surname. Whether in the open or in the shadows, many people will be watching you. I hope that the king of foreign lands will be careful with his words and actions and protect himself. As for His Majesty has his own reasons for doing this. In the future, the king of foreign lands will understand." After leaving the hall, Gao Lisher stopped and gave Wang Chong a long sigh. There seemed to be more to his words. Wang Chong wanted to ask more, but Gao Lisher had already turned and stepped into the hall behind him. After a few moments of silence, Wang Chong composed himself and quickly descended the imperial stairway of white jade. Not long after Wang Chong left, Gao Lisher returned to the holy emperor's side. "Your Majesty, this matter has been a major blow to him. Is there really no need to tell him?" Gao Lisher asked hesitantly in the hall. "There's no need." The holy emperor waved his hand, his expression indifferent. "My body will find it very difficult to last for too long. Even if this matter is corrected, it will happen again in the future. It is better to treat it as a test for him and see what level he can reach in the end. This old servant understands." Gao Lisher lowered his head and bowed. "But Your Majesty's attitude has changed so much this time. In the imperial court, the ministers are probably not used to it." In the hall, the holy emperor leaned against his dragon throne, his eyes half closed as he calmly waved his hand. "Severe illnesses require fierce medicine, and troubled times require severe punishment. We have already spent 20 years guarding against them. If we do not reveal a flaw and give them a chance, how could we possibly draw them out?" The holy emperor spoke in words that only the two of them could understand. The word "them" caused Gao Lisher to deeply sigh, a hint of worry in his eyes. "This old servant understands." Cough, cough. At this moment, he heard a series of coughs, and these light coughs immediately caused Gao Lisher to pale. "Your Majesty!" Gao Lisher quickly strode forward and supported the holy emperor. At the same time, a vigorous and heavy pure yang energy surged from Gao Lisher's body into the holy emperor's. The atmosphere in the hall was chaotic. It took a long time for everything to calm down. Outside the palace, in a carriage, Wang Chong sat motionless, his mind in turmoil. During this meeting with the holy emperor, Wang Chong did not get the answer he wanted, even at the very last moment. The state of the sage emperor, the strange chime, and Gao Lisher's words as he left, all of this seemed to be abnormal. Wang Chong had thought that after meeting the Holy Emperor, the confusion and doubts in his heart would lessen, but now, the doubts that shrouded his heart had deepened. "Wait, we're not going back to the residence. Take me to the south of the city," Wang Chong suddenly said. The next moment, the carriage immediately headed toward the south of the city. On Green Dragon Street in the south of the city, there was a huge mansion that was dignified and solemn. 2 stone lions stood erect, and above it hung a black gold plaque. "Zhou Residence." The 2 large words were written in flamboyant calligraphy. This was the residence of the Minister of Glory, Zhou Wenshin, of the Tang dynasty. Wang Chong raised his head and looked at the residence, his mind in turmoil. The Tang dynasty had 27 ministers and 81 ministers. Zhou Wenshin was one of the leaders of the 27 ministers, as well as one of the most important civil officials of the King of Song and the Wang family. When that incident happened, Zhou Wenshin had turned against the Tang dynasty at the last minute. He was one of the important civil officials who had suddenly turned against the Tang dynasty. Even the King of Song had not expected his betrayal. Since he had not obtained the answer he wanted from the Holy Emperor, Wang Chong had almost immediately thought of Zhou Wenshin. If he could understand why this pillar of support at the King of Song's side had suddenly changed his attitude, he might be able to understand the entire matter. "I'll have to trouble you to send a message that the King of Foreign Lands, Wang Chong, has come to pay his respects." Standing at the gate of the Zhou residence, Wang Chong made a gesture, upon which Zhang Ke swiftly stepped forward and handed over a visiting card. A guard at the gate of the Zhou residence had already stepped forward and taken the visiting card. After glancing at it, he immediately grimaced. "Your Highness, please wait a moment. This one will go and send the message." After saying that, the guard captain of the Zhou mansion put away the visiting card and quickly entered the mansion. Wang Chong stood in front of the gate of the Zhou residence, his eyes slowly closed. The Zhou residence had been calm at the start, but a few moments later, it was thrown into chaos, and one could even hear a woman's voice. "Milord," Zhang Ke turned his head, a hint of worry in his eyes as he gazed at Wang Chong. As a disciple of the Eagle and an important intelligence officer at Wang Chong's side, he was well aware of what had happened. Zhou Wenshin had turned against the Tang dynasty at the last minute and had been refusing visitors for many days. During the morning court session, he had claimed that he was ill. Chapter 1256. Relax. He'll definitely come out to meet us. Wang Chong seemed to know what Zhang Ke was thinking, and he spoke without raising his head. The disturbance in the Zhou residence quickly calmed, and the estate became quiet once more. Time slowly passed, and just when Zhang Ke believed that Wang Chong had made an error in judgment, he heard a flurry of footsteps. Through the open gate of the Zhou residence, Zhang Ke saw a middle-aged scholar wearing a plain hat and dressed in plain clothes. His face was pale as he walked out, accompanied by a group of servants and servants. As he walked, his head was slightly lowered, his eyes fixed on the ground. His entire body seemed to be absent-minded and restless. When he was still 30 or 40 paces from the gate, a servant seemed to call out to him. Only then did the middle-aged scholar return to his senses, tidied his clothes, and swiftly went to greet Wang Chong. "This Zhou has failed to welcome the King of Foreign Lands. I hope that your Highness will forgive me." Zhou Wenshin raised his sleeves and clasped his hands in greeting. "Lord Zhou is too polite. Will you not invite me in to sit?" Wang Chong indifferently said. "Oh." Zhou Wenshin seemed to wake up from a dream and hurriedly stepped to the side to lead the way. "Your Highness, please, please." Only after saying please 3 times did Zhou Wenshin lead Wang Chong into the residence. Upon entering the hall, everything appeared very strange. The maids were strange, their faces pale, and the servants at the door had strange and unnatural expressions. Even Zhou Wenshin felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. "Is Lord Zhou still not prepared to speak?" Wang Chong took up the teacup on the table, lifted the lid, and lightly wiped away the foam floating on its surface. Hearing this, the maidservant's face paled, and Zhou Wenshin's face alternated between green and white. "HAA." With a long sigh, Zhou Wenshin stood up like a prisoner about to be executed. After a night of torment, he had finally chosen to calmly face his impending fate. Your Highness, Zhou Wenxin has nothing to say about this matter. It is Zhou Wenxin who has wronged your Highness. No matter how your Highness punishes me, this Zhou will calmly face it and have no complaints. After Zhou Wenxin said this, he bowed down respectfully, bending his body at a 90-degree angle. Wang Chong was the highest commander of the Tang dynasty in Khorasan and the acting Qixi Protector General. Zhou Wenxin's defection had resulted in Wang Chong being stripped of his military authority and his position as acting Qixi Protector General. The months of hard work at Talas had been lost in a single night. One could say that Wang Chong was the direct victim of this matter. Zhou Wenxin could refuse to meet with the king of Song or Wang Zhen, but he could never avoid Wang Chong. As a civil official, he had to uphold Confucian etiquette, but in this matter, he was lacking in virtue. This was one of the reasons Wang Chong was so confident that he would meet with him. Lord Zhou, you're truly a good person. Zhang Ke looked at Zhou Wenxin with a cold snort, his voice brimming with enmity and resentment. In Qixi, it was precisely because of these people that Wang Chong had been so enraged that he had vomited blood and fainted. Zhang Ke still remembered this matter even now. He had no good impression of these people. Moreover, Zhou Wenxin and the other officials who had defected had committed treacherous acts that Zhang Ke and the others despised the most. Enough! Wang Chong waved his hand to stop Zhang Quebec. Lord Zhou, so this is your explanation? Wang Chong put down his teacup and calmly said, Your Highness, this Zhou also has his own difficulties. This Zhou and the King of Song have known each other for many years, and this one has always admired the King and Lord Wang General when your Highness galloped across the foreign battlefield, vanquishing foreign foes and raising the prestige of our country. This Zhou applauded your Highness. If possible, please believe that this Zhou would never have done such a thing. Nonsense. Didn't you still do it? Is this your explanation? Do you know how many of our brothers have been sacrificed to deal with Arabia? Do you know how many of our brothers have shed their blood and died on the foreign battlefield just because you said that you had no other choice? Zhang Ke angrily retorted. At any other time he would never have been so agitated, but this time was different. Half a year of hard work had been for naught, and Zhou Wenxin's expression was so calm that Zhang Ke found it impossible to accept this. Zhang Ke? Wang Chong glanced at Zhang Ke and stopped him, and then he turned to Zhou Wenxin. So, just who ordered Milord and who made Lord Zhou change his mind? Can you not say anything? Your Highness, forgive me. It's not that this Zhou doesn't want to say it, but that this Zhou cannot. Zhang Ke became even more enraged at these words, and he glared at Zhou Wenxin. But Wang Chong seemed to understand, and he placed his hands on the armrests of his chair. I understand. Zhang Ke, let's go. With these words, Wang Chong waved his sleeve and strode out, ignoring Zhou Wenxin. Let alone Zhang Ke, even Zhou Wenxin was left speechless for a long time. Today was the day of Wang Chong's conferment, and almost everyone in the capital knew that Wang Chong had appeared at the Zhou residence. Zhou Wenxin had originally believed that Wang Chong had come in a threatening manner to denounce him, but he had only said a few words before leaving. Even Zhou Wenxin was dumbfounded. Wait a moment. As Wang Chong stepped over the threshold, Zhou Wenxin couldn't help but call out. Does Lord Zhou have anything else to say? Wang Chong stopped, his back to the hall as he indifferently said, Your Highness, this matter truly was this Zhou's mistake, and I failed the trust of the King of Song and Lord Wang, but the phoenix carving the sparrow also has its origins. If your Highness and the King of Song have any complaints, feel free to direct them at this Zhou. Let go of this Zhou's family. Be at ease. We haven't fallen to such a level. With these words, Wang Chong stepped through the door and vanished. Behind him, Zhou Wenxin breathed a sigh of relief and respectfully bowed. Zhou Wenxin thanks your Highness. After leaving the Zhou clan residence, Zhang Ke was still rather indignant. Milord, are we just going to let him go? Everyone says that scholars have their own strength of character. This kind of person is simply infuriating. Let him go. Everyone has their own difficulties. We can't completely reject him just because he made a single mistake, Wang Chong calmly said. Wang Chong calmly said, far less agitated than Zhang Quebec, But this bastard didn't say a single word. He caused Milord to be stripped of his position, stripped of his military authority, and caused all our brother's efforts to go up in smoke. If we just let him go, wouldn't that be letting him off too easily? Wouldn't we have come here for nothing? Zhang Ke indignantly said. Who says he didn't say anything? Wang Chong countered. Ah. Zhang Ke was dumbfounded by these words. He had accompanied Zhou Wenqin and Wang Chong the entire time they had met, and Zhou Wenqin had been evading and evading, even listing out his difficulties and excuses. He hadn't said a single word about anything else. Wang Chong had said that he had said a few things. How could that be possible? Zhang Ke carefully thought back, but he couldn't remember Zhou Wenqin saying anything useful. Zhang Ke, sometimes even if you don't say it, you just say it. There are some things that don't necessarily need to be said. And didn't he say it before he left? The phoenix polishes the sparrow, and there is a connection. After saying this, Wang Chong waved his sleeve and stepped onto the carriage, leaving behind Zhang Ke, who stood there in a daze. The phoenix polishes the sparrow, and there is a connection. What does that mean? Zhang Ke muttered to himself, unable to understand. Although he was in charge of intelligence, when it came to illusions, he was worlds apart from Wang Chong. There's no need to think about it. Let's go back to the residence. Wang Chong's voice came from the carriage. Zhang Ke's heart chilled, and he immediately stepped onto the carriage. With a crack of his whip, 2 horses immediately pulled the carriage back to the Wang family residence. As the carriage rumbled through the streets, Wang Chong sat motionless in the carriage, lost in thought. The phoenix polishes the sparrow was an illusion from the Western Han dynasty. At the time, the shaman Gu had appeared in the palace, and the implications were widespread. The 3 departments had held a joint trial, and the officials in charge of the investigation had traced the shaman Gu's wooden and cloth puppets to a palace maid. That palace maid had suffered all kinds of torture, and before she died, she had said, "The phoenix polishes the sparrow, but it was against my will." So, it's because of this? This thought flashed through Wang Chong's mind. The phoenix polishes the sparrow because he was forced, but how many people in the imperial court could force Zhou Wenqin to do so? In that moment, Wang Chong vaguely thought of something. Now, it's time for me to act. No matter who you are, I will definitely drag you out. Wang Chong quietly said to himself. Time slowly passed, and Wang Chong returned to the residence. By nightfall, the eagle had flown over the wall and into the Wang family residence. Zhang Ke quickly came knocking on Wang Chong's door, a letter in hand. Your Highness, it's bad. Master has just sent word that Zhou Wenqin has submitted his resignation to the imperial court, saying that he is unwell and unable to handle court affairs. He has requested to resign and return home, and the imperial court has already approved it. Master just sent someone to investigate and found that the Zhou residence has been emptied. Zhang Ke got down on one knee and sternly reported. I understand. Wang Chong sat cross-legged on his bed, cultivating his expression unperturbed. Your Highness, now is the best time to ask Zhou Wenqin about what happened that day. Why don't we send someone to capture him now? There's no need. Wang Chong waved his hand, not even opening his eyes. His words left Zhang Ke flabbergasted. But, milord, Zhang Ke was completely dumbfounded, unable to comprehend Wang Chong's thoughts. There's no need to worry about him. Let him do as he pleases. Wang Chong indifferently said, ending the conversation with a single sentence. Zhang Ke was filled with unwillingness and confusion, but Wang Chong had already made his decision, so he could only withdraw. Once Zhang Ke left, Wang Chong finally opened his eyes. They shone with a brilliant light, but they quickly calmed down, and the room regained its silence. Chapter 1257. The night quickly passed, and on the morning of the next day, Wang Chong took a bath and changed his clothes. After washing his face and rinsing his mouth, the maids of the residence helped him put on the crimson imperial robe that symbolized his status as king of foreign lands. He straightened the violet gold crown on his head, one hand resting on the imperial sword at his waist while the other gripped the dragon token that symbolized his status as king of foreign lands. Then, under the watchful eyes of his mother, the maids, and the servants, he leisurely seated himself on a golden-red palanquin. Young master is so impressive. Young master is so handsome. With the crimson imperial robe and the violet gold crown, even Pan and Insong you would feel ashamed of their inferiority before young master. The pretty maids blushed as they gazed at the palanquin outside the gate. When they had been helping Wang Chong change into the imperial robe, their hearts had been thumping in their chests. At some point, Wang Chong had gone from that hedonistic scion to a hero of the Tang dynasty. Moreover, the temperament that he had tempered on the battlefield caused his every move to emit a soul-stirring charm, causing the hearts of all the young girls to be moved. Wang Chong's mother, Lady Zhao, stood at the gate, her eyes slightly red, gratified and excited. Today was Wang Chong's first time participating in the morning court session of the Tang dynasty, and nothing could make Lady Zhao more excited. All the hard work he had put in had paid off at this moment. From this moment on, the most worthless child of the Wang clan had grown up. He could now act like the Wang clan's old master and display his talents in the royal court with a different identity. Raise the palanquin. Outside the gate of the Wang clan, a resounding voice rang out, and 8 burly guards rose to their feet, lifting the golden-red palanquin toward the imperial palace. As Wang Chong set off, firecrackers exploded behind him. Wang Chong sat in the 8-bearer palanquin, escorted by 2 rows of guards as he swiftly made his way to the imperial city. After passing through many alleys, he appeared at the palace gate. By the time Wang Chong arrived, there were already many palanquins parked in front of the palace gates. The morning court assembly of the Great Tang would begin from the 5th watch period, and some of the officials would even wake up at the 4th watch period. Wang Chong could be considered one of the latecomers. There were many empty palanquins at the city gate. According to the rules of the Tang dynasty, the palanquins of civil and military officials could only be sent to the gates of the imperial city. But when Wang Chong arrived, he saw a sedan bearing the emblem of the Wang clan. Big Uncle Wang Zhen was already waiting for him there. Chonga, this is your first time participating in the morning court session as an advisor-in-waiting. In a while, remember to watch, listen, and learn more during the morning court session. Before you speak, think carefully before you speak and think thrice before you speak. In addition, the civil and military officials of the imperial court have their own shifts, and their positions cannot be randomly assigned. Although you are the king of foreign lands conferred the title of king of foreign lands by the imperial court values your status as a participant in politics, so when assigning you a shift, it still follows your status as an advisor-in-waiting. But in the end, you are still a king of the imperial court, the king of foreign lands conferred by His Majesty. Other than a different shift, there are no other restrictions in the imperial court. Wang Zhen waited for Wang Chong to step forward, and as they entered the imperial palace, he earnestly informed him of the taboos of the imperial court. The imperial court is different from the battlefield. There are many rules and regulations and many restrictions. One cannot make a decision based on one's status alone. In addition, a tall tree attracts the wind, and the current imperial court is much more complicated than before. When you were on the border, many people couldn't do anything to you, but when it comes to matters of the imperial court, especially the memorials sent in from various places and the urgent discussions that need to be resolved, if you don't speak with substance, you will be mocked by the officials and used to attack you. King Qi and the others might even make an issue out of it to discredit you. Chong understands. Wang Chong deferentially said. Although Wang Chong was a great general and hero revered by countless people on the battlefield, the imperial court was a completely foreign place, and martial strength could not solve any problems. When the Tang dynasty's war god Wang Zhongxi was at his peak, he left Longxi's Big Dipper city, resigned from all his posts, and became the crown prince's junior guardian, precisely because he was framed by the imperial court. A place where the smoke and flames of war could not be seen was far more dangerous than a place where the smoke and flames of war could be seen. Wang Chong had understood this a long time ago. However, not even his big uncle knew that his thinking was completely different from his big uncle's. He had his own plans for this morning court session. In the imperial palace, the golden guards opened the way in the morning. From the palace gate, the 2 sides of the alleys were guarded by the golden guards, leading to the place where the imperial court was to be held. Even those unfamiliar with the imperial court would be able to follow these rows of golden guards through the maze-like imperial palace to find the place where the court was to be held. Along the way, Wang Chong listened to his big uncle's instructions as he made his way deeper into the imperial palace. Along the way, all the golden guards he encountered would look at Wang Chong with reverence. Whether it was the Imperial Guard, the Golden Guard, or the Protectorate Army on the border, as long as Wang Chong was a soldier of the Tang dynasty, there was no one who did not revere Wang Chong. But the civil officials he encountered along the way were completely different. Although Wang Chong did not dare to say anything because of his status, he could not help but point fingers at him. Officials protecting each other, 3 titles a year. At such a young age, he's already the king of foreign lands. Does he still care about the rules of the imperial court? He's just a brat who's still wet behind his ears, and he hasn't even grown a beard yet. It's fine if he's placed on the border, as youths are full of vigor and courage, but what's with him participating in the imperial court? Are we old officials not a match for a youngster? Shoo, lower your voice. He's the king of foreign lands, and he's currently in the limelight. Don't make trouble. One clan has 4 ministers and generals. What king of foreign lands? He's clearly the Azura king who kills people like flies. How despicable. The officials whispered to each other from a distance, but given Wang Chong's cultivation level, even if they did, their words would still resound like thunder in his ears. Chong, there's no need to pay attention to them. They're all old officials who have sat on the bench for decades. You've been promoted so quickly, so it's no wonder they have complaints. The familiar voice of Wang Chong's big uncle, Wang Zhen, came from the side. There were all sorts of officials in the imperial court. There were those who had been promoted due to their outstanding achievements, those from noble clans, those who had been recommended for their filial piety, and those who had passed the imperial examinations. There was no such thing as one or the other. There were only the people of the King of Song and King Qi's faction. In truth, when I entered the imperial court, I was the same. Wang Zhen continued. Wang Chong couldn't help but smile at these words. The matter was naturally not as simple as his big uncle made it out to be, but Wang Chong had already weathered many storms, so he didn't care about such slander. Big uncle, let's go. With a wave of his sleeve, Wang Chong and his big uncle walked in. Foul brat, remember that there are no relatives in the imperial court. Once you enter, you must call me Lord Wang. Wang Zhen said, making a rare joke about Wang Chong. Yes, Lord Wang. Wang Chong couldn't help but smile. The hall of Taihe was solemn and dignified. By the time Wang Chong entered, the imperial court was already packed with civil and military officials. Wang Chong, dressed in a crimson imperial robe, calmly walked in, instantly attracting the attention of the people in the hall. In an instant, the ministers who had been discussing in low voices immediately stopped, and the entire hall suddenly became much quieter. Countless officials began to size up this youthful king of foreign lands who was bursting with success. Although Wang Chong had made a name for himself in the War of the Southwest, many of the most powerful officials of the imperial court had never even seen him. To these people, only by squeezing into this dazzling hall of Taihe would they have the right to see him. As they gazed at Wang Chong's youthful figure, they had all sorts of expressions: envy, jealousy, admiration, hostility, and kindness. But in the face of so many of the most illustrious and powerful officials of the Tang dynasty, in the face of so many complicated gazes, Wang Chong remained calm and unperturbed. While the officials were sizing him up, he was also sizing up the officials in the hall. A few moments later, Wang Chong's eyes paused as he spotted a familiar figure. The King of Song. Beneath the cinnabar coiling dragon pillar, the King of Song, dressed in his imperial robe, stood motionless. Although he had been avoiding Wang Chong this entire time, and even when Wang Chong had gone to visit the King of Song, he had not been able to see him. But no matter how much the King of Song tried to avoid him, he could not avoid the morning court session. As if sensing Wang Chong's gaze, the King of Song turned his head and glanced at him. But after this glance, he immediately turned his head away, avoiding Wang Chong's gaze. But to Wang Chong, this one glance was enough. At that moment, Wang Chong sensed that the King of Song's mind was weighed down by many things, as if he had fallen into some massive puzzle. It seems like the old butler wasn't lying, Wang Chong mentally muttered to himself. There were times when words were not necessary to communicate. For Wang Chong, he had at least confirmed one thing. The King of Song was still the King of Song. He had not changed, but he had probably encountered a very difficult problem. Buzz. Just as he was pondering this, Wang Chong suddenly heard a cold snort. Almost at the same time, a gaze filled with malice turned toward him from another direction. Wang Chong turned his head and saw that in a place opposite the King of Song, there was another figure with a majestic aura, noble and dignified, his aura not one bit inferior to the King of Song's. But this person had a sinister aura that was not present on the King of Song's body. The ministers around this person stood, smiling coldly at Wang Chong, making no attempt to conceal the malice in his eyes. A thought flashed through Wang Chong's mind. This was not the first time he had met King Qi. During the Marquis conferral ceremony, Wang Chong had already met King Qi face to face. However, this was the first time they were actually standing so close, serving as ministers in the same palace. Wang Chong sneered, fearless. He glared back at King Qi, showing no intention of backing down. Chapter 1258. Wang Chong did not bicker with King Qi. The present was different from the past. Wang Chong was flushed with success, like the sun at high noon. Moreover, as the first king of the Tang dynasty with a different surname, Wang Chong's status was not one bit lower than King Qi's, so there was no need for him to back down. The Holy Emperor had not yet begun the court session, so Wang Chong's gaze left King Qi and began to look elsewhere. His big uncle was correct. There truly were many new faces in the hall. Wang Chong had wandered through the capital for a period of time, and although he hadn't attended the morning court session, he had a basic understanding of the officials in the imperial court, their unique traits, and the way they spoke and did things. Moreover, he had been influenced by what he had seen and heard, and even though he had never entered the Hall of Supreme Harmony, he had a rough idea of who the people in the imperial court were. But there were many faces in the imperial court that Wang Chong could not find the corresponding mark in his mind. Moreover, these people stood in the ranks with their backs straight and their eyes looking forward. They did not move at all, as if they were made of wood. Even their movements and postures were exactly the same. It was obvious that they were from the same group, which was very strange. Moreover, the majority of them seemed to be around 30, a rather young age in the imperial court. These people had their eyes closed and were motionless, paying no attention to anyone else. In this situation, even if Wang Chong wanted to glean any information from them, he would find it very difficult to do so. Wang Chong's gaze rested on these people for a few moments before moving away. Suddenly, a gaze attracted Wang Chong's attention. Wang Chong was standing at the door to the hall, so he could clearly see that the King of Song was standing by the coiling dragon pillar, seemingly preoccupied and absent-minded. However, Wang Chong noticed that the King of Song's gaze was constantly drifting in a certain direction. Wang Chong followed his gaze and saw a tall and slender figure, who looked virtuous and respectable, staring motionlessly at the top of the hall. This person's aura did not appear to be particularly powerful. At the very least, in terms of martial arts, he was completely inferior to Wang Chong and Wang Chong. However, the power and prestige that he had accumulated over the years far surpassed that of the other ministers. Just by standing there, he was like a crane in a flock of chickens. Although he had his hands behind his back and was motionless, the ministers around him would occasionally glance at him with respect. Wang Chong immediately recognized it. Li Zhenu, the prime minister of the Tang dynasty, had been a virtuous prime minister in the eyes of the public for more than a decade. He had won the respect of the civil and military officials in the imperial court with his achievements over the past decade. But to Wang Chong, he was a traitor. Chong, I'll go first. Your position is over there. Remember, this is your first court session. Talk less and observe more. At this moment, a voice rang in his ears, pulling Wang Chong back from his thoughts. Yes, Big Lord Wang. Wang Chong had originally wanted to call him Big Uncle, but he quickly changed his mind. He quickly took his place, and Wang Chong also stopped at the end of the court shift. Boom. The moment Wang Chong took his place, a wave of laughter came from the court, and all eyes turned to look at Wang Chong with derision. What a fine advisor in waiting! Those malicious gazes were full of derision. When Wang Chong had first arrived, he had truly intimidated a large group of people, but in the end he was just an advisor in waiting. His shift was even lower than that of some minor officials. Wang Chong only faintly smiled. Standing at the back had its benefits, at least when it came to what he wanted to do. As for those gossipers, Wang Chong didn't even need to think to know that they were on King Qi's side. However, this kind of cold mockery and ridicule couldn't shake his state of mind at all. In fact, it didn't even cause a ripple. At this time, a white-haired eunuch in embroidered robes waved the whip in his hand high up in the hall. With the sound of the whip, the entire imperial court fell silent. All of the civil and military officials stood according to their ranks in an orderly manner, motionless. His Majesty has arrived. At the same time, the sound of chimes and musical instruments echoed in the air. Before the Holy Emperor even appeared, a majestic and powerful aura suddenly appeared out of nowhere, enveloping the entire hall like a tidal wave. The next moment, before the eyes of countless people, a golden figure appeared from the side hall, exuding the presence of a god from the heavens. Then he sat down on the dragon throne at the very top of the hall. The moment that figure sat down, the entire hall began to tremble, as if the entire world itself was trembling. Even Wang Chong couldn't help but feel an immense pressure bearing down on him. With a solemn heart, he lowered his head slightly. "Long live His Majesty! Long live His Majesty!" Amidst the shouts, all of the ministers and officials lowered their heads and bowed. The atmosphere in the hall was solemn and respectful. "Ministers, if you have something to report, please raise the memorial. If not, the court is dismissed." To the right of the Holy Emperor, Eunuch Gao's face was ruddy, like a reincarnated Mithra. "Your Majesty, this subject has something to report." As soon as Eunuch Gao finished speaking, a civil official strode forward, ceremonial tablet in hand. Thus began the day's court session. Wang Chong stood at the very back of the hall, silently observing everything. Whether it was in his previous life or in his mind, this was the first time he had truly participated in a court session to discuss state affairs. Being personally involved was completely different from hearing the gossip of the common folk. The dynasties of the Central Plains had been changing for thousands of years. Generation after generation, all of the ministers would discuss state affairs in the court, forming a perfect process. From the budget of the military and the allocation of funds to the various regions, to the minor cases of wrongful convictions, torrential rains, and mudslides, everything was within the scope of discussion in the court. In such a large country, the number of files and memorials accumulated every day numbered in the hundreds and thousands. This was also why the morning court session of the Tang dynasty began at the 5th watch of the night. A long time ago, the Holy Emperor had delegated a considerable portion of his authority to others. Other than the most important proposals, the Holy Emperor would not easily express his position and participate. Last year, there was a flood in Ji County. 60 to 70% of the people drowned. Later, the court sent people to deal with it, but they found that 9 out of 10 households in Ji County were poor. More than 90% of the people could not even guarantee 3 meals a day. Their household's finances were only a table, a bed, and a suitcase. Their savings were no more than a dozen copper coins. They were extremely poor. The court removed the local officials and sent in 6 or 7 young and promising officials who had performed meritorious deeds and were adept at governance. In the end, Ji County did not change at all. It remained extremely poor. Later, the court made a painful decision. The Ministry of Revenue allocated funds to Ji County, but not long ago, the court sent an imperial censor to investigate. Not only did Ji County not become rich, it became even poorer than before. "I heard that advisor-in-waiting Wang is extremely intelligent. What are your thoughts on this?" Halfway through the court session, a discordant voice suddenly rang out in the court. In an instant, the atmosphere in the court suddenly changed, becoming strange. In an instant, Countless gazes focused on Wang Chong from all directions. Wang Chong had been listening from the side, but when he heard these words, he raised his head and looked in the direction of the voice. He saw a civil official wearing a green official's robe standing at the front of the ranks. He was currently looking back at him with a cold smile. Around him, the other civil officials were also looking at him with mocking expressions, as if they were waiting to watch a good show. Supervising physician Lin Changxin. Wang Chong immediately recognized this person. He was a staunch follower of King Qi. This was his first day of attending the morning court session, and Lin Changxin had used this kind of question to make things difficult for him. It was clear that he had ill intentions and wanted him to make a fool of himself. On the other side, King Qi was leaning against the cinnabar coiling dragon pillar, laughing coldly in his heart. He rarely participated in these kinds of matters, but he had more or less understood a little from Lin Changxin and the others. The matter of Ji County had always been a headache for the Ministry of Personnel and the Ministry of Revenue. No matter what they did, it could not be resolved. And once the imperial court interfered, it became even worse, even worse. This was something that had never happened before. To tell the truth, this was a dead knot that could not be resolved. Using this question to make things difficult was to embarrass Wang Chong. Although Wang Chong's reputation as the king of foreign lands resounded through the world, the matters of the imperial court were completely different from the battles on the border. One did not need a saber to kill in the imperial court. Foul brat, I'd like to see how you answer. If you keep your mouth shut, I'll send people to spread the word that you're a good-for-nothing who only knows how to kill, a brute, a demon. If your answer is wrong, I'll have everyone laugh at you, and then I'll repeat the story, saying that you don't know how to learn, that although you've rendered great service, you're still a profligate scion in your bones. If what you say is even the slightest bit useful and seems plausible, I'll have everyone add fuel to the fire and have them carry out your plan. If the problem of Ji County cannot be resolved, I'll say that you're an armchair strategist, babbling nonsense, hindering the affairs of the state, and that you're not suited to be an official of the imperial court. In any case, no matter what you do, I'll have you lose all standing and reputation. Prince Qi said nothing, but his eyes were brimming with pride. To deal with this brat, who was still wet behind the ears and had not even fully grown hair, he truly had thousands of methods. The imperial court was his territory, and it was up to him to decide how he wanted Wang Chong to die. Chong. On the other side, at the front of the class of civil officials, Wang Zhen was also looking back at Wang Chong with a worried expression. King Qi's attack had caught everyone by surprise, but not even Wang Zhen could do anything about it. In front of so many civil and military officials, he could not openly give Wang Chong pointers. The entire hall was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Even the Holy Emperor and eunuch Gao were looking at Wang Chong. Chapter 1259. It felt like only an instant had passed, but it also felt like countless centuries. Finally, when the atmosphere in the court had reached its most oppressive state, and just when everyone thought that Wang Chong was going to back down, everyone suddenly heard that young voice. The various officials have already explained the problem of Ji County very clearly. It is because of the periodic floods that the people there have become so poor. Therefore, in order to solve the problem there, we must first solve the floods. Wang Chong stood at the end of the line and slowly raised his head. His words stunned everyone who heard him. Ji County had been poor for a long time. When the officials of the imperial court first arrived there, they only thought about how to solve the poverty, but they did not think deeply about the source. As a result, Ji County became more and more destitute. But after countless debates in the court, everyone finally learned that the root cause of Ji County's poverty was the floods. This was Wang Chong's first time attending the court, but he was actually able to point out the root cause of the countless discussions over the years. If it were any one of them, they would not be able to do it. It could be seen that Wang Chong was truly talented, and no one could underestimate him. This kid is very powerful. He does have some ability. Lin Changxin stood at the front of the line and looked at Wang Chong, who was dressed in a bright red robe. His eyes narrowed, and his heart was filled with awe. This revolt was to embarrass Wang Chong, to let him know that the internal affairs of the imperial court were not as simple as the battles at the borders. But Wang Chang's first words had hit the nail on the head, and Lin Changxin could not help but feel a sense of threat. As for the imperial court sending 6 or 7 officials, they were unable to solve the problem. Not only did the situation in Ji County not resolve, it became even more serious. The reason is very simple. It is better to teach a man to fish than to teach him to fish. Lord Lin, can I take a look at the dossier on Ji County? Wang Chong looked at Lin Changxin. Lin Changxin was stunned. From his standpoint, he naturally didn't wish to let Wang Chong see the dossier, but in front of so many civil and military officials, this was absolutely impossible. Bring the dossier to Lord Wang. Lin Changxin made a gesture, and an official stepped forward and quickly handed over a thick stack of files. The Ministry of Personnel and the Ministry of Revenue had to prepare dossiers for the matters discussed in the imperial court in case of emergencies and for other people to look at. This was all part of the routine. Wang Chong opened the dossier, found the volume of Ji County Annals, and quickly browsed through it. The entire imperial court was silent. No one dared to disturb them. If it was in the past, everyone would only laugh at him. After all, Wang Chong was only a general. But now, everyone had a serious expression on their faces. They no longer dared to look at Wang Chong like before. Pa! A few moments later, Wang Chong closed the dossier and handed it back to the official. It seems like my judgment was correct. Based on the county annals of Ji County, the frequent floods have caused the land of Ji County to become extremely barren and lose the ability to grow crops. To control the floods, one needs to build a dam, and this takes a long time, making it very difficult to control the floods. More importantly, the floods have made the common people apprehensive and not rashly plant crops there. Thus, in this lowly subject's view, Ji County needs to adapt to the local conditions and make changes. It is no longer suitable for agriculture and farming. Wang Chong indifferently said as he looked at the officials in the hall. Bang! Wang Chong's words sent the entire imperial court into an uproar. Absurd! Food is the most important thing to the people. If the common people don't grow crops, what will they rely on to eat? King of foreign lands, you speak nonsense. Your Majesty, this subject accuses advisor-in-waiting Wang Chong of harming the country and the people and making irresponsible remarks about state affairs. Your Majesty, please punish him. And here I was thinking that he would have some brilliant idea, but it was this. Laughable. Wang Chong's words were like stabbing a hornet's nest, causing the officials to become agitated and begin to criticize him. If not for the fact that Wang Chong had just been made king of foreign lands and had been some other advisor-in-waiting, the civil officials of the court would have long since cursed him out of the Taiha Palace. So he's just someone who plays to the gallery. I was just wondering how he could be so formidable. On the other side, King Qi sneered. He had been worried for nothing, but in the end, when it came to internal affairs, Wang Chong was just a good-for-nothing, half-learned man. Chong, over. Wang Chong's big uncle, Wang Chong, felt his heart sink. Despite his repeated warnings, in the end, Wang Chong had still fallen into the trap of these people. The civil officials of the court knew how to eat people. Just based on Wang Chong's words today, these people could use this as a pretext to wipe clean Wang Chong's reputation for meritorious service on the border, making Wang Chong the laughingstock of the world. Wang Chong had spent so much effort and risked his life to get here, but all his efforts had been wasted in a single night. At this moment he was filled with self-reproach. Heh! Wang Chong held his hands behind his back, taking in the expressions and reactions of all the officials in the hall, and he only grinned. Rely on what? Of course it's the iron, copper, and silver mines. Just when the crowd was at its most furious, Wang Chong suddenly spoke, his words immediately suppressing all the angry voices in the hall. For a moment, the entire hall was silent. King of foreign lands, what do you mean by this? In the end, it was supervising physician Lin Changxin who spoke, voicing the question on everyone's mind. His expression was solemn, and there was a questioning look in his eyes. It's very simple. Although Ji County is no longer suitable for the development of agriculture and farming, I happen to know that Ji County is rich in iron, copper, and silver mines. Wang Chong confidently said. What? Everyone was dumbfounded by Wang Chong's words. Even King Qi, standing by the coiling dragon pillar, was shocked speechless. Ji County had iron, copper, and silver mines. How could one of the poorest counties have so many precious minerals? How could this be? This was simply a fantasy. The imperial court had sent 6 or 7 officials there, but they had never heard of any mines there. Wang Chong's words left everyone dumbfounded. King of foreign lands, are you speaking the truth? A civil official suddenly stepped forward. It was remonstrating physician Han Xiaoyun, a solemn expression on his face. If what Wang Chong said was true, then not only could he fill the imperial court's treasury, he could also help an impoverished county rise above the rest. This was truly killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Of course, Wang Chong indifferently said, one of my subordinates happened to be passing by, so he learned of it. As for whether it's true or not, the imperial court can send people at top speed. It should be a matter of a few days before we know. None of the officials in the court believed Wang Chong's words. Ji County was not an important place. If there were iron, copper, and silver mines there, and Wang Chong knew of them without the knowledge of the common people, then all the good fortune of the world had been seized by Wang Chong's subordinates. Wang Chong, dressed in his crimson imperial robe, stood with his head held high, his expression confident and relaxed. Seeing the doubtful gazes of the crowd, Wang Chong only grinned and offered no explanation. When he was reading the county records of Ji County, he had especially examined the map of the area, and after carefully thinking about it, he recalled that Ji County was rich in iron, bronze, and silver mines. Because these mines were buried rather deep, not even the common people knew of them, and the area remained in a state of extreme poverty. But Wang Chong was different. He could use his memories to buy Wuzi steel from the Hydra mine and guide his cousin Wang Liang to a deserted island to bring back meteoric iron, so he naturally could discover the mines beneath Ji County. Moreover, when the calamity arrived in the future, the earth would crack open and all these mines would be exposed. The iron mines can be used for mining, smelting, forging, and weaponsmithing. These can recruit a large number of peasants and provide them with work. And the copper and silver mines can be used to forge coins and fill the treasury. At the same time, a portion can be transferred to Ji County to deal with the flood disaster. The flood disaster in Ji County took a long time to deal with and cannot be dealt with in a short period of time. This is also the reason for the failure of the previous officials. The common people have to eat every day and cannot wait for so long. But if the imperial court allocates funds, we can spend 2 to 3 years mobilizing everyone to build dams, divert the flood, and allow the land to recover on its own. When the dams are built and the flood disaster is completely dealt with, we can once again develop agriculture and farming. Sharpening the axe will not delay the work of cutting firewood. Wang Chong smiled at the end. Hearing Wang Chong's final words, the civil and military officials in the hall all had strange looks on their faces. Beneath the coiling dragon pillar, King Qi's face was as black as the bottom of a wok, extremely unsightly. He had not instructed Lin Changxin to deal with Wang Chong so that he could show off. In his original plan, no matter how clever Wang Chong was, he would be able to think of a way to sabotage his plans. He would not be able to carry them out. But if Ji County had an iron mine, copper mine, or even silver mine, coupled with Wang Chong's plan, then even an idiot would know that someone was trying to sabotage his plans. Because just based on these, Wang Chong was already in an invincible position. He had completely lost this round. This bastard! King Qi clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. Although he hoped that this was fake, with Wang Chong's current status, he would not joke about such a thing. The risk was too great, and it would be too easy to expose him. And from the reactions of the officials, Lin Changxin's attempt had also backfired. Not only had he failed to attack Wang Chong, but he had also increased Wang Chong's influence in the imperial court. Lord Wang, where are these mineral veins that you mentioned? We will immediately send people to investigate and excavate. Another civil official stepped forward and asked. Wang Chong did not hesitate and quickly reported 3 locations. The places where the mines were buried had some special characteristics, and because they contained silver, copper, and iron, the surface of the mountain was different from other mountains, making it very easy to identify. Did you hear that? Record these places and immediately send them to the officials of G County. Follow the map and excavate on the spot. The civil official said, "Yes, Lord." At the edge of the imperial court, a minor official in charge of passing on information quickly left the hall. Chapter 1260. Chong, good job. Wang Zhen made no effort to conceal his praise. In the situation just now, even Wang Zhen had believed that Wang Chong had been tricked, but with a twist of fate, Wang Chong had shone brilliantly on the first day of the court assembly, winning the admiration of all the officials. There was a massive gap between the martial path and the civil path, especially when it came to participating in politics. Thus, the majority of the generals were silent, only occasionally speaking up when it came to military matters. But in this aspect, Wang Chong was able to switch freely. High above the hall, on the high steps, the Holy Emperor stood motionless, his might as imposing as a mountain. It was impossible to fathom his emotions. But Gao Lishir imperceptibly nodded his head. Although Wang Chong had the problem of letting his emotions affect his decisions, whether it was in internal affairs or military affairs, Wang Chong was truly a formidable expert. The meeting in Ji County quickly concluded, and the hostility directed at Wang Chong had clearly lessened. Some of the civil officials would occasionally mention Wang Chong with a hint of respect, a stark contrast from before. As time passed, there were fewer and fewer matters that needed to be discussed in court. In this aspect, the Tang dynasty was still extremely efficient, and it was precisely because of this efficiency that the Holy Emperor had separated much of the government from the Tang dynasty. As Wang Chong silently observed everything, he gradually gained an understanding of how the imperial court participated in politics and its various mysterious procedures. Before he knew it, the sun had risen, and it was time to dismiss the court. "Your Majesty, this subject has a memorial." At this moment, an official that Wang Chong had no impression of suddenly walked out of the ranks. Holding the ceremonial tablet in his hand, he respectfully bowed. "His Majesty has an order." "Speak." Gao Lishir glanced at the Holy Emperor of the Tang dynasty sitting on the dragon throne and suddenly said, "Your Majesty, now that the Tang dynasty is at peace, all the barbarians around the Tang dynasty have been intimidated by the power of the Tang dynasty, and all the barbarians around the Tang dynasty have surrendered to the power of the Tang dynasty. Moreover, the imperial court has also signed an agreement with all the states to trade with each other. In order to reduce the taxes and corvée labor of the people, I propose to disband the prefectural armies, and after giving them a certain amount of compensation, let them return to their villages to farm and engage in production." Boom! As soon as the official finished speaking, the entire court exploded. All of the generals glared at the official angrily. Even Wang Chong's expression changed in that instant. "Your Majesty, I object." Ridiculous! The prefectural army system was established by Emperor Gaozu and Emperor Taizong. A single strand of hair can affect the state. This subject objects. "Disband the prefectural armies, unless I die." You civil officials just want to target us generals. You've already transferred the young Marquis back, and the protectorate armies have already been disbanded. What else do you want? Since all of you speak so clearly and logically, why don't you just disband all the soldiers and generals? If something happens, you civil officials will personally go into battle. It was like a hornet's nest had been poked in the hall, and all the generals of the military were enraged. Even Minister of War Zhangqiu Zhenqiong had a hint of anger in his eyes. "Bastard! So are you generals trying to blackmail the imperial court?" Another civil official stepped out of the ranks and harshly rebuked. "Civil officials rule the country while generals guard the borders. This is everyone's duty. If we do as you say, then you generals should be the ones to rule the country. Ever since the founding of the Tang dynasty, it has been at war year after year, leaving the country empty of resources and wasting resources. Isn't this the perfect time to disband the prefectural armies and improve the lives of the people?" A third unfamiliar civil official stepped out of the ranks. Then came a fifth, a sixth. More and more civil officials joined in the crusade against the generals. This was especially true for that blackmailing general, whose body was covered in cuts and bruises. Although civil officials were powerless on the battlefield and no match for generals, the imperial court was not a battlefield, and martial strength was useless here. No matter how high or low a general's cultivation level was, they could not gain the slightest advantage here. Your Majesty, this subject has a memorial. This subject wishes to impeach General Zheng for using alarmist words to mislead the people and harm the state. This subject also wishes to accuse him of dereliction of duty. On the other side, King Qi signaled with his eyes, and his civil officials added fuel to the fire, joining in the crusade against the generals. In the imperial court, if the King of Song could be said to be a staunch hawk of war, then King Qi was a staunch hawk of war. On this point, he and these civil officials were of the same lineage, and they coincidentally had the same views. Wang Chong stood at the very end of the ranks, his pupils constricting as he watched the civil officials attack the generals, his eyes turning colder and colder. The army in Khorasan had already retreated, and the various protectorate armies had been reduced. The Confucian army supervisors had even infiltrated the various ranks of the army, and the army had been forced to retreat again and again. Wang Chong had never imagined that they would be so unforgiving as to use the prefectural armies as an example. If the protectorate armies of the border prefectures were disbanded, the elite soldiers of the prefectural armies could be drawn from the prefectural armies and quickly restored to their previous state of complete victory. But if even the prefectural armies were disbanded, the Great Tang's foundation would be severed. The debate between the civil and military officials grew more and more intense, and just when all the generals were being attacked and condemned by the civil officials, a resounding voice resounded through the hall. Your Majesty, this subject objects. This voice caused the entire hall to fall deathly still, all voices of debate vanishing as the generals looked in Wang Chong's direction, their faces filled with excitement and morale. The king of foreign lands. In the entire military, Wang Chong possessed the supreme status. Although he had only been rising for a very short time, in terms of influence, not even the protector generals and great generals of the two border generals could compare to him. Wang Chong alone carried more weight than all the generals in the hall. Moreover, Wang Chong had an illustrious background, and his grandfather, Wang Jiuling, was a virtuous minister revered by all the people of the Tang dynasty. No general could compare to him. Lord Wang, what is the meaning of this? At this moment, the unfamiliar civil official who had proposed the reduction of the prefectural armies turned to Wang Chong, and the others began to look at Wang Chong. The hall was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop, and the tension in the air had become subtle. Your Majesty, this subject believes that the proposal to reduce the prefectural armies is unnecessary and can be annulled. Wang Chong ignored the civil official, instead turning to the Holy Emperor. Wang Chong, you're impudent. The various protectorates go to war year after year, placing an enormous burden on the common people. Do you still want to continue like this? Another civil official stepped forward, thoroughly infuriated by Wang Chong's attitude. So, you mean that when the soldiers risk their lives on the border to protect the country, they are indulging in extravagant pleasures and preying on the common people? Wang Chong turned his head and indifferently glanced at the civil official, his eyes as cold as ice. The civil official's expression froze, and he was momentarily speechless. No matter how bold he was, no matter how dissatisfied he was with the militarists, he would never dare to say such a thing. Your Majesty, this subject denounces these civil officials who spread lies to mislead the people and harm the state. Your Majesty, I request that they be stripped of their posts and punished severely. Wang Chong coldly said. From the moment he stepped into the hall until now, Wang Chong had given the impression of a gentle and dignified person, but the proposal to disband the prefectural armies had thoroughly infuriated him. This was the first time Wang Chong was denouncing a civil official of the court after being conferred the title of king, and he was denouncing 10-some people at once. In a flash, the aggressive momentum of the civil officials was greatly suppressed. Although Wang Chong was participating in the court as an advisor-in-waiting, his status was still there. He was the king of foreign lands, the first of the Tang dynasty, personally conferred by the Holy Emperor, and his status was not something that an ordinary person could compare to. Of all the officials of the court, not even Wang Chong's big uncle Wang Chong had a status equal to Wang Chong, let alone the others. Wang Chong. Impudent. This old man knows that you've just been conferred the title of king and are in the prime of your youth. But this is your first court session, and yet you already know how to use your status to bully the other officials. You're simply too daring. The imperial censors were approved by Emperor Gaozu and Emperor Taizong, and they were also adopted by the sovereigns of all dynasties. To block the channels of speech is tantamount to deceiving the emperor and bringing disaster to the Tang dynasty. Your Majesty, this old subject denounces King Wang Chong of foreign lands for daring to block the channels of speech. This old subject requests that Your Majesty take back his title, demote him to a commoner, and never employ him again. All of a sudden, an old voice sounded. In the upper reaches of the hall, near the white jade steps and where the Holy Emperor was seated, the Grand Preceptor, who had been meditating this entire time in his rosewood armchair, suddenly stood up and turned to look at Wang Chong, his expression frigid. The Grand Preceptor, Zhang Zhongmi, the head of the civil officials of the Tang dynasty. The moment the Grand Preceptor spoke, the entire hall seemed to be swept through by a cold gust of wind, plunging from the lively early spring into the biting cold of winter. The entire court fell silent out of fear, and even the generals did not dare to speak. Even the king of Song slightly paled. The Grand Preceptor was a person of virtue, prestige, and enormous influence. If Wang Chong did not respond well, it would affect his future career and prospects. The king of Song was concerned about Wang Chong's prospects, but Wang Chong's thoughts were completely different from the king of Song's. Wang Chong coldly snorted. Even in front of this esteemed Grand Preceptor of the Tang dynasty, he showed no intention of backing down. The prefectural armies were the foundation of the empire, and the Confucians had gone too far, even wanting to tamper with the militarists' foundation. Let alone the Grand Preceptor, even if his status was 10 times more formidable, he would still not back down. This was no longer a simple dispute between civil and military officials, a dispute between militarists and Confucians. It was shaking the foundation of the empire. If even Wang Chong backed down, the Tang dynasty might not be far from destruction. Grand Preceptor, you are a senior of 2 dynasties, and Wang Chong has always treated you with great respect. I didn't think that your selfishness would be so heavy that you would sacrifice the public for your own selfishness. This is truly too disappointing, simply shameless. To everyone's surprise, Wang Chong stepped forward in his crimson imperial robe, his first words causing an uproar in the hall. Chonga! Wang Zhen hurriedly called out, his face paling. The Grand Preceptor's status was extremely important, and he had far too much influence. He could not be directly contradicted, and Wang Chong was still too young. Impudent. Not even Wang Bo would dare to act like this today. Is this how he taught you? Chapter 1261. Teacher Zhan was now more than 80 years old and had once been a classmate of Wang Chong's grandfather, Wang Jiuling, Wang Bo. But even so, the Grand Preceptor's temper had always been fiery. Wang Chong was just one of Wang Jiuling's grandchildren, yet he dared to contradict him in the imperial court. This was simply preposterous. Sensing the Grand Preceptor's rage, the entire imperial court fell silent. Just by contradicting the Grand Preceptor, the entire court would probably criticize Wang Chong the next day. Everyone had originally believed that Wang Chong would at least show some restraint, but they had all underestimated the rage in Wang Chong's heart. Ever since returning from Khorasan, Wang Chong had been suppressing his anger. The Confucians had completely disregarded the state and blindly suppressed the militarists, completely enraging him. And there was one thing that they had all been wrong about. Wang Chong had never been a person who coveted fame and honor. A calamity was about to descend, and Wang Chong had done all he could to create the best environment for the Tang dynasty to welcome the coming calamity. Now, all his efforts had been for naught. Let alone becoming a king, even if he reached even higher, What meaning would it have? When the calamity arrived and the central plains were destroyed, what difference would it make whether one was a noble or a commoner? What meaning would there be? What my grandfather taught me was that the world should be for the common good, that the country should come first, and that the country should be protected and protected. It was not to abandon the public good for personal reasons in the imperial court, to flaunt one's seniority and be disrespectful. Wang Chong harshly said to the Grand Preceptor. Boom! The entire hall quaked at Wang Chong's words. Everyone was stunned by Wang Chong's words. Ever since Grand Preceptor Zhan had entered the court and become the state preceptor of the Tang dynasty, no one had ever dared to contradict him or speak to him in such a manner. And no one had dared to act like Wang Chong and publicly criticize the Grand Preceptor for abandoning the public good for personal reasons and for being disrespectful. At this moment, even Gao Lishur was stunned beside the dragon throne. On the other hand, Wang Chong's big uncle Wang Zhen's heart sank, and chills ran down his spine. If this continued, the feud between the Wang clan and the Grand Preceptor would be set in stone. Stinking brat, you, how dare you? Hearing Wang Chong's words, old Grand Preceptor Zhan was so angry that his entire body was trembling. Even his 3 strands of beard were trembling, and his lips were turning purple. He had lived his entire life as a noble and respected person. When had he ever suffered such humiliation? Given Grand Preceptor Zhan's personality, there was no way he could accept this. However, it was precisely because he had never encountered such a thing before that even though he was trembling with anger, he couldn't find any suitable words to scold. For a moment, even his face turned purple from anger. Grand Preceptor, I am the king of foreign lands of the Tang dynasty, and I enjoy the title of nobility no less than yours. Is he just a brat in your mouth? In this imperial court, there were only the emperor and his ministers. Where did this brat come from? If I say that you're sacrificing the public for private reasons, are you convinced? Wang Chong coldly snorted. Not only did he not retreat, he even took 2 steps forward. Perhaps it was because the impression that Wang Chong had given others was that he was always amiable, never retorting even when people were pointing fingers at him. As a result, he gave others the impression that he was a junior who was easy to talk to, easy to bully, and without a temper. But now, when Wang Chong was enraged, his eyes were as intimidating as lightning. As an imperial great general, Wang Chong had trained himself to command millions of soldiers on the battlefield, and no one could compare to his aura of steel and fire. Not only that, not even Wang Chong had realized that when he was enraged, the enormous aura of the war saint of the Central Plains had unwittingly and naturally began to exude from him. The officials were intimidated by Wang Chong's gaze, and they involuntarily took several steps back. King of foreign lands, Gao Lishur frowned imperceptibly when he saw this scene in the main hall. By publicly contradicting the Grand Preceptor, Wang Chong had offended all the civil officials. This would not bode well for Wang Chong in the future. The condemnation of the civil officials could drown him. Gao Lishur subconsciously glanced at the Holy Emperor. The Holy Emperor's eyes were half closed, his face expressionless, and he had no intention of trying to stop Wang Chong. The Grand Preceptor was so angry that he couldn't speak. He could only extend a hand and point at Wang Chong, his fingers trembling. But the Grand Preceptor was even more enraged than Wang Chong. The country comes first, and the people are of utmost importance. The military goes to war for the sake of the common people. Without the prefectural army system, do any of you know what the consequences will be? Wang Chong's gaze swept over the officials in the hall, his eyes bloodshot. They were all rotten Confucians. They believed that they were doing this for the sake of the common people, but it was precisely because these Confucian civil officials had shaken the foundation of the empire. They had expended a great deal of effort in this western expedition to reach Khorasan and establish the coalition army, but a few Confucian scholars of the court had destroyed it in a single day. This sort of crippling of one's own limbs and martial arts was simply unprecedented. In the 37th year of the Western Han dynasty, Emperor Gaozu of Han went on a northern expedition. His army of 200,000 was besieged at Baideng and was in dire straits. In the end, he had to use a honey trap to escape from the Xiongnu. In the 14th year of the Great Sui dynasty, Great Sui fought with the Turks and was defeated. The Turks marched down and the entire Sui dynasty had no more soldiers. It was too late to recruit soldiers and had no choice but to send a princess to make a marriage alliance. This was a great humiliation. Later on, they wrested their strength and divided the Turk Khaganate into two, the Eastern and the Western Turks. Only then were they able to avenge this humiliation. In the 14th year of the Great Sui dynasty, the Great Sui dynasty was defeated by the Turks. The entire Great Sui dynasty had no more soldiers. Every dynasty has raised armies. If they won every battle, there would be no problems. But if they were defeated and had no more soldiers to back them up, they would immediately face the danger of shaking the foundation of the empire and being reduced to ashes. In history, because there was no system of prefectural armies, some small kingdoms would even have their capital cities invaded by barbarians. The barbarians would destroy the kingdom, and the barbarians would even establish their own dynasties. It was precisely because of this that Gaozu and Taizu of the Tang dynasty learned from the lessons of the previous dynasty and established the prefectural army system. Emperor Taizong even personally taught the sons of the nobles in the capital, allowing the Tang dynasty to flourish in martial arts, resulting in today's powerful and prosperous army. Later on, the Tang dynasty relied on an endless stream of soldiers to constantly suppress the Eastern and Western Turks, the Goguryeo Empire, the Shi, the Khitans, the Uzun and Mengshizhao, and even later on, when they advanced into the western regions. Only our dynasty can rely on a mere army of 600,000 to accomplish such a feat. In the 11th year of Gaozu's Tianxian reign, the Uzun, the Eastern, and Western Turks attacked each other. If not for the timely reinforcements from the prefectural armies, the empire would have long since fallen into ruin. Wang Chang's voice was so deafening that it shook everyone in the hall. His eyes were blood red, and he appeared to be in a towering rage. If Wang Chong had only been angry, no one in the hall would have paid him any mind. After all, this was the Taiha Palace, and no matter how great one's achievements, no matter how high one's rank, one couldn't act recklessly. But although Wang Chong was in a rage, every word he said was reasonable, and the examples he cited were all well-founded and well-documented. All of them had been recorded in history and were indisputable. At some point, even Grand Scribe Yan Wenzhang, who had been sitting on the side, swiftly writing down the words of the officials, couldn't help but stand up and look attentively at Wang Chong. Even he had to admit that Wang Chong's words were not without reason. To think that dissolving the prefectural armies is tantamount to shaking the foundation of the empire. Grand Preceptor, it seems to me that your eyes have been blinded by greed, and you've gone senile. To think that you would even make such a proposal. Grand Preceptor, I advise you to retire. Rumble. Each of Wang Chong's words was like a thunderclap, causing the Grand Preceptor's body to stagger back several steps, almost unable to stand steadily. King of foreign lands, you dare. You're truly infuriating me. The Grand Preceptor's face was ghastly pale, and Wang Chong's retire had caused his blood energy to surge, and he almost fainted. Grand Preceptor! Grand Preceptor! The Grand Preceptors paled in fright and hurriedly rushed forward. Several civil officials rushed to the left and right to support the Grand Preceptor. Wang Chong, you're impudent. Is this how you speak to the Grand Preceptor? At this moment, no one was happier than King Qi. With a flap of his robe, King Qi walked out of the shadow of the coiling dragon pillar, his face brimming with righteousness. He stared at Wang Chong and rebuked. The Grand Preceptor is of old age, and he has worked tirelessly for the prosperity of the Tang dynasty. Is there any civil and military official in the court who does not admire him? Even I have to respectfully address him as Grand Preceptor. If something were to happen to the Grand Preceptor, would you be able to bear the responsibility? King Qi turned to the Holy Emperor on the dragon throne. Your Majesty, this subject wishes to impeach the King of foreign lands for disrespecting his elders. The Tang dynasty is governed by benevolence, righteousness, and etiquette, and respecting one's elders is the foundation of the country. For the King of foreign lands to speak so rudely to the Grand Preceptor, This subject proposes that he be stripped of his noble title and punished as an example to the rest of the country. The mood in the imperial court instantly turned strange. Everyone in the capital knew of King Chi's character, and even the civil officials did not like him very much. In their memories, King Chi rarely appeared on the scene, usually ordering his subordinates to make trouble for him. This was probably the first time he had personally stepped onto the scene to impeach another official. Wang Chong only sneered at this sight. "Your Majesty, this subject also has a memorial. This subject wishes to impeach King Chi for dereliction of duty. The imperial court is the place to discuss politics and deal with the affairs of the state." As an imperial prince of the Tang dynasty, King Chi has an exalted status, but in his 20-some years in the imperial court, he has never paid attention to outside matters. The first suggestion he has made in his life is actually about this lowly subject showing no respect for his elders and respecting one's elders. King Chi is of mediocre talent, ignorant, and incompetent. This subject believes that King Chi is not worthy of such a heavy responsibility. This subject requests that Your Majesty strip King Chi of his noble title. "You!" King Chi suddenly turned his head, his heart exploding with rage at Wang Chong. As the saying went, those who spoke too much were bound to slip up. King Chi had always cherished his reputation, and if he could have his subordinates handle it, he would never appear. Thus, even though he had done many things in private over the years, no one had been able to do anything to him. But now that he had finally found a chance to denounce Wang Chong had seized on this point and made a countercharge. He had truly been caught off guard. Chapter 1262. Wang Chong, don't speak nonsense and make irresponsible remarks. King Chi, what achievements have you made? Others may not know, but do you not know? In this king's view, the Bureau of Rights is more suitable for you. Wang Chong sternly said. There was no retreat, so there was no need to retreat. There was no need to endure, so there was no need to endure. The proposal to dissolve the prefectural armies had touched Wang Chong's reverse scale. Whether it was the Grand Preceptor or King Chi, no matter who it was that wanted to play tricks on this matter, Wang Chong would not let them off lightly. This was no longer a simple conflict between factions or the imperial court. It concerned the millions upon millions of people of the Central Plains. Enough. King Chi, king of foreign lands. Don't make trouble. Beside the dragon throne, Gao Lisher finally couldn't bear to watch any longer. The two of you are imperial princes of the Tang dynasty, revered and revered. How could you behave in such a manner in front of His Majesty? A normal court discussion about the dissolution of the prefectural armies had turned into a child's play. Not even Gao Lisher could continue watching. Gao Lisher's rebuke instantly caused the court to quiet down. In the end, Gao Lisher had no official rank, but everyone knew that Gao Lisher had followed the Holy Emperor for so many years that he had long ago become one with the Holy Emperor. It was clear that not even the Holy Emperor could continue watching this dispute. Withdraw. The Holy Emperor suddenly spoke, his 5 fingers trembling as his dignified voice resounded through the hall, suffused with an unquestionable tone. Yes, yes, Your Majesty. Wang Chong and King Chi both bowed and retreated to the side. Wang Chong's expression was indifferent, but King Chi was gnashing his teeth in anger. Bastard thing, this king will never let you go. A chilling light flitted through King Chi's eyes. He had originally believed that he could use Wang Chong's rudeness to contradict the Grand Preceptor, but he had not expected that Wang Chong would be able to turn the tables on him with just a few words. This infuriated King Chi. He wanted nothing more than to kill Wang Chong right there and then. Let's return to the court. Gao Lisher waved the horsetail whisk in his hand. In addition, king of foreign lands, the Grand Preceptor is 80 years old. It's understandable that young people are hot-blooded, but can't the Grand Preceptor make a concession? These words truly did slow down the dispute between Wang Chong and the Grand Preceptor. Yes, Wang Chong understands. Wang Chong also bowed. He understood that the Holy Emperor was very protective of him. Your Majesty, it is understandable that the king of foreign lands is angry about the matter of dissolving the prefectural armies, But this lowly subject believes that the words of the civil officials are not without reason. The Tang dynasty is currently at peace, and it has just signed treaties with Uzan, the Eastern and Western Turks, Mengshi Zhao, Goguryeo, and Arabia. It truly does not need so many soldiers, and the expenses of the prefectural armies and horses are not small. In times of war, this would have been fine, but now that there is no war and even the Arabian Empire has been defeated by the king of foreign lands, there truly is no need to keep so many soldiers. If there is truly a need, we can keep a portion of the prefectural armies and recruit the rest for the time being. At this moment, at the top of the hall, at the very front of the hundreds of civil and military officials, a tall and slender figure wearing a loose robe suddenly spoke. When this voice rang out, the entire hall fell silent. Whether it was the civil officials or the generals, they all slightly lowered their heads, a look of respect in their eyes. The virtuous minister of the Tang dynasty, Li Zhenu. No one had expected him to speak at a time like this. As the prime minister of the Tang dynasty, the head of all the civil and military officials, Li Zhenu's words carried extraordinary weight, even above those of Wang Chong, the king of Song, and King Qi. Once the prime minister expressed his opinion, it would affect the process and result of the decision. Many people might even change their minds and follow the prime minister's wishes. Wang Chong had originally planned to return to his rank, but the prime minister's words caused his pupils to constrict and his face to pale. Wang Chong was just about to speak when his eyes suddenly caught sight of a nearby coiling dragon pillar and came to a sudden stop. The king of Song. Wang Chong's eyes widened, and he suddenly turned to look at that familiar figure. From the very beginning, the king of Song had been in a daze, appearing to be absent-minded. He had not participated in the majority of the court discussions, appearing completely different from his usual self. But at this moment, as Prime Minister Li Zhenu spoke, the king of Song seemed to be stimulated by something. He suddenly raised his head and looked at the prime minister's back. At this moment, the king of Song's eyes flashed with light, his expression extremely complicated. Wang Chong's eyebrows rose as he followed the king of Song's gaze. As he looked at the figure in the loose robe, his mind was in turmoil as he vaguely thought of something. As Wang Chong was thinking, Li Zhenu's words quickly caused a chain reaction. This subject agrees. This subject agrees. This subject agrees. For a moment, all the civil officials in the hall began to agree, and even some officials who had not expressed their opinions joined in. Wang Chong's eyes chilled, and he stepped forward without hesitation. Your Majesty, this subject objects. Since this is about dissolving the prefectural armies and is related to the Bureau of Military Personnel, we should ask the various protectorates on the border, including all the titled generals, protector generals, and great generals. Once the protector generals of the various protectorates have voted, we can make a decision. We can't just make a decision in the imperial court. Wang Chong's words were resolute and immediately attracted everyone's attention. Your Majesty, this subject agrees. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded. The Minister of War, Zhangqiu Jianqiong, instinctively sensed that this was an opportunity. Wielding his ceremonial tablet, he strode out. Even Zhangqiu Jianqiong couldn't help but sigh in praise. Wang Chong had truly made a brilliant move by roping in all the protector generals of the Tang dynasty. Although the decisions of the imperial court had always been made within the imperial court, no one dared to say that dissolving the prefectural armies had nothing to do with the protector generals and great generals of the border. Zhangqiu Jianqiong was almost certain that whether it was Geshu Han, Zhang Shogue, and Sis Hun, or Gao Xianji, all of them had the same stance on the matter of dissolving the prefectural armies. As long as these top-class generals of the Tang dynasty expressed their stance, they would immediately gain extraordinary weight. When the time came, the civil officials would no longer be able to make the decisions. The king of foreign lands and the minister of war instantly caused all the civil officials in the imperial court, including great prime minister Li Zhenu, to grimace. But this was only the beginning. A moment later, another voice resounded through the hall, giving even more weight to the opposing voices. Your Majesty, this subject also objects. King Song, who had been standing motionlessly by the coiling dragon pillar this entire time, suddenly raised his robe and walked out of the ranks as he loudly declared. Swish! In an instant, the entire court was dead silent. Wang Chong, Zhangqiu Jianqiong, and the King of Song, these three influential figures of the imperial court had expressed their stance at the same time. This extraordinary weight placed a heavy pressure on all the civil officials. And when the King of Song stepped forward, Wang Chong could clearly see that even Prime Minister Li Zhenu slightly paled, losing his usual composure. Your Majesty, this subject agrees. This subject agrees. This subject agrees. All the generals in the imperial court were invigorated by this sight and began to step forward in support. The imperial court suddenly froze. Everyone turned to the ceiling of the hall, awaiting the Holy Emperor's decision. The hall was quiet, and in this silence, Wang Chong could clearly hear a sound that was neither a bell nor a chime. It was very low and seemed to be coming from an extremely distant place. No one in the court noticed this, but when they heard this sound, Wang Chong's heart sank and his face paled. Wang Chong raised his head. Although the ceiling of the hall appeared normal, Wang Chong could clearly sense a subtle change in the atmosphere. We understand. We will discuss this matter later. At this moment, the Holy Emperor's majestic voice resounded through the hall. Saying this, the Holy Emperor suddenly stood up from his throne and left. Long live His Majesty! In an instant, everyone lowered their heads and cried out, "Long live," as they watched the Holy Emperor depart. Just like that, the first day of the imperial court came to an end. With the crack of the whip, all the civil and military officials walked out of the Hall of Supreme Harmony like a tide. Your Highness, it's all thanks to you this time. Otherwise, we generals might not have a place to stand in the future. Not bad, not bad. Your Highness has truly increased our prestige. Although there have always been disputes between civil and military officials, they've resorted to every conceivable means this time. They've gone too far. Yes, yes. Fortunately, Your Highness was present. In the past, although the Grand Preceptor was somewhat dissatisfied with us, he rarely participated in these disputes. But in the last few sessions, the Grand Preceptor has been present. With our status, it's simply impossible for us to oppose the Grand Preceptor. If we want to oppose the Grand Preceptor, perhaps only Your Highness can do it. Once the court session was over, Zhangqiu Jianqiong personally stepped forward and accompanied Wang Chong out of the hall. The other generals had all gathered around Wang Chong, all of them ruddy and excited. The Grand Preceptor, King Qi, the Prime Minister, the many civil officials, and the generals of the court lived under this pressure almost every day. Wang Chong's arrival truly made everyone feel like they could hold their heads high, especially when they saw the Grand Preceptor's ghastly pale face and swaying on his feet. All of them felt like they had finally been able to breathe a sigh of relief. Although Wang Chong had angered the Grand Preceptor to the point of suffocation, Wang Chong was right on one point. The Grand Preceptor truly had been flaunting his seniority in this period of time. But these words could only be said in their minds, not spoken aloud. Everyone is too polite. Matters of state are not child's play. If not for Milord's assistance, Wang Chong would not have been able to do anything alone. Wang Chong calmly said. The generals chatted as they made their way out. After this matter, Wang Chong had already established himself as a top-class leader among the generals of the court. As they left the Taihe Palace and descended the steps, they saw a towering figure, his silver-white imperial robe flapping in the wind, exuding an otherworldly aura. Wang Chong and Zhangqiu Jianqiong glanced at each other and then quickly followed. Your Highness. Wang Chong and Zhangqiu Jianqiong stepped forward and bowed. Wang Chong, come with me. Chapter 1263. Then Zhangqiu Jianqiong will take his leave. Zhangqiu Jianqiong understood that the two had matters to discuss, so he immediately retreated to the side. The other generals also dispersed, leaving only Wang Chong and the King of Song to calmly walk forward. Did you feel it during this court session? The King of Song and Wang Chong walked side by side, indifferently asking this question. Wang Chong nodded. Although it was only the first day, Wang Chong could already sense the turbulent undercurrents of the imperial court, the treacherous and extremely complicated currents. The situation back then was even more complicated than it is now. The King of Song indifferently said. This could also be considered an explanation for Wang Chong. Just who were those unfamiliar faces? So many people couldn't have suddenly appeared in the imperial court. Just where did they come from? Wang Chong asked. I can't answer you right now, but based on their records, these people are all perfect. Not even I can say anything against them. The King of Song said. So, it was the Grand Preceptor, right? Wang Chong suddenly stopped and looked forward. At this moment, his eyes became extremely sharp. The Grand Preceptor was the leader of the civil officials, and almost all these unfamiliar faces were civil officials. With so many people and so many new faces, it would have been impossible without the Grand Preceptor's approval. And even if it wasn't the Grand Preceptor's doing, it definitely had something to do with him. I had the same thoughts as you before, but I'm afraid that the matter is not that simple. The Grand Preceptor truly is involved, but he is not the one controlling everything from behind the curtains. Moreover, I'm more worried about another matter, the King of Song solemnly said. Wang Chong's brow rose, and just when he was about to ask a question, a mellow voice came from behind him. Your Highnesses, please wait. The two of them turned around and saw a tall and slender figure dressed in a red official robe of the first rank quickly approaching them from behind. Seeing that figure, the expressions on the two's faces became somewhat subtle. Prime Minister. The King of Song was the first to bow, while Wang Chong, who was beside him, smiled calmly. With his hands behind his back, he remained motionless. The one chasing from behind was none other than the leader of the group of officials, the Prime Minister of the dynasty, Li Zhenu. Your Highnesses are too courteous. Li Zhenu walked over and hurriedly returned the greeting. What can I do for you, Prime Minister? Wang Chong said indifferently. He and Li Zhenu had just gotten into an argument in the royal court, and now that he saw him, he didn't have a good expression. Your Highness, King of Foreign Lands, the King of Song, perhaps the two of you have some sort of misunderstanding. Li Zhenu cupped his hands in front of him and smiled as if he was bathing in the spring breeze. This one was only discussing the matter of dissolving the prefectural armies on its own merits and had no other intentions. Moreover, if there is a need in the future, we can enlist more soldiers in advance, and we can even increase the size of the prefectural armies. All of this is not impossible. Li Zhenu spoke without missing a single detail, and his expression was carefree and magnanimous. His expression was even more amiable. He was like a ball of cotton, making it impossible for others to be angry at him. Moreover, as a first-rank official and the leader of the officials, Li Zhenu did not put on the airs of an official. This was extremely rare even among the officials, and it was one of the reasons why the Prime Minister of the Tang dynasty was so respected. Lord Prime Minister is too serious. This king had no such intentions. A hint of confusion flashed through the King of Song's eyes, and some of the doubts in his heart seemed to dissipate as he hurriedly replied. Only Wang Chong's expression remained cold and unmoved. If he did not know the background of this virtuous minister of the Tang dynasty, Wang Chong really might have ended up like the King of Song and all the other officials of the court, deceived by his reputation and smile. But Wang Chong was well aware that anyone who was deceived by his amiable demeanor would be eaten alive. Not even their bones would remain. There had been people who had been deceived by his appearance and smile in the past, in the present, and in the future, but Wang Chong was not one of them. This was because Wang Chong was well aware that this virtuous minister had an even more illustrious name, Li Linfu. And there was another saying about this prime minister, honey on the lips and a sword on the belly. The person before him was probably the most skilled at disguise in the history of the Tang dynasty, perhaps even in the history of the Central Plains. Wang Chong did not believe a single word of what he had said. At the appropriate time, expand the prefectural armies were just words that would never happen. Lord Prime Minister, the governor of Ichuan has asked me to send his regards. Wang Chong suddenly stepped forward and smiled as he spoke to Li Zhenu. However, such a simple sentence caused the high-ranking prime minister's expression to change. Even someone of Li Zhenu's temperament couldn't help but turn ashen and speechless for a moment. But it was only for a moment. Li Jianu quickly regained his composure, his face ruddy and brimming with a smile. It seems like the king of foreign lands has a very deep misunderstanding of me. Li Jianu was not angry, and his face remained relaxed and carefree. The king of Song, king of foreign lands, this minister has some matters to attend to and will take his leave. I will come and explain to the two of you on another day. Li Jianu said. Lord Prime Minister is too polite. We will meet again another day. The king of Song clasped his hands and watched as Prime Minister Li Jianu left. Only when he was out of sight did he turn to Wang Chong. Wang Chong, why did you suddenly mention Li Shizhi? Do you also believe in that matter? It's not that I believe it, but that it's the truth. Wang Chong indifferently said as he gazed in the direction that Li Linfu had vanished. The governor of Ichuan, Li Shizhi, had once been highly regarded by the Holy Emperor, but Li Linfu had tricked him into retiring so that he could return to the capital and get close to the Holy Emperor. But in the blink of an eye, Li Linfu had deceived the Holy Emperor that Li Shizhi was old and sickly, so he asked the Holy Emperor to take pity on him and have him retire so that he could live out his remaining years in peace. When Li Shizhi realized that he had been tricked, he revealed the matter. But not a single person in the court, not even Li Linfu's political enemies, believed him. This was because Li Linfu had the reputation of being a virtuous minister and would never do such a thing. Eventually, Li Shizhi died of depression. This matter caused quite a stir in the court for a time, but there was no conclusive evidence and no one believed it, so it was ultimately left unsettled. Not even the king of Song had expected that Wang Chong would dig up this matter. As he looked at the serious expression on Wang Chong's face, the king of Song became pensive. So, Your Highness has been avoiding me for some time because of Prime Minister Li Jianu, correct? Wang Chong suddenly said. Buzz. The king of Song instantly paled. This isn't the place to talk. Let's go. The king of Song suddenly grabbed Wang Chong's arm, glanced around, and then silently pulled Wang Chong forward. Outside the city gate, the king of Song pulled Wang Chong onto a carriage. After taking a seat, he gave a long sigh. Wang Chong, you're very clever. Even if I didn't tell you about this matter, I know that you would have found a way to uncover it for yourself. But the imperial court is full of people, and it's a place of quarrels, not a place to talk. The soldiers of Khorasan have already been withdrawn, and the strength of the protectorates has been reduced. Even the prefectural armies are being reduced. What could be more important than this? Wang Chong said with a self-deprecating smile. The king of Song fell silent. So, Your Highness, just what happened that day? Wang Chong got straight to the point. At this point, there's no need to hide anything. The king of Song sighed as he slowly recounted the events of that day. Wang Chong had learned a great deal about what had happened that day from his big uncle, Zhangqiu Jinqiong, and the other officials, but the king of Song had filled in the most important piece of the map. As it turned out, the king of Song had long ago learned of the proposal to withdraw Khorasan. As an important and authoritative leader of the imperial court, it was essentially impossible to hide many decisions from the king of Song. Many reports would be read by the king of Song before they were even sent to the imperial court. At the start, the king of Song had not taken the proposal to withdraw from Khorasan to heart. In his view, it was simply impossible to pass, the product of some impulsive civil official. But in the imperial court, the king of Song finally sensed that something was wrong. Firstly, Wang Zhen was not present, and secondly, Zhangqiu Jinqiong, the minister of war, was nowhere to be seen. What made the king of Song most uneasy was that this anti-war proposal had received the support of many civil officials in the imperial court. It did not seem like the product of some impulsive civil official at all. Even worse was that the king of Song had discovered that these civil officials had come prepared, and with the grand preceptor at their head, they had formed an alliance with King Qi. In the imperial court, King Qi had mobilized his subordinates to fully support this proposal. But what had truly allowed this proposal to pass was the stance of another person. Li Linfu. Before the king of Song had even said it, Wang Chong had already guessed at the answer. You're right. It was the Lord Prime Minister. The king of Song sighed. Wang Chong, you've never interacted with the government of the imperial court before, And this is your first time attending a court meeting, so you don't know that the Prime Minister is not just a status, but has another meaning among the officials. The Lord Prime Minister rarely interferes in the affairs of the imperial court, and when he does, it means that it is not just his will, but also His Majesty's will. Lord Li understands the will of the heavens and is adept at grasping the meaning of the Holy Emperor. In the last 10-some years, he rarely spoke, but when he did speak, it was always in accord with the Holy Emperor's will. All proposals approved by the Prime Minister would ultimately be passed by His Majesty. There were even times when it was inconvenient for His Majesty to express his will through the Lord Prime Minister. Thus, after all these years, everyone tacitly agreed that Lord Li's will was actually the Holy Emperor's will. When the Lord Prime Minister stepped forward in the imperial court, I originally believed that he was representing the Holy Emperor and would oppose this proposal. I didn't expect that in the end, he would step forward and vote in favor. And this vote caused the entire imperial court to undergo a massive reversal. Even many generals were forced to abandon their positions and change their attitudes. Chapter 1264. Until now, I still can't tell if it was the Prime Minister's own will or His Majesty's will that day. The King of Song murmured and sighed. Wang Chong was silent. If it were him, he wouldn't be so confused. However, the King of Song was clearly different. As the saying goes, the onlooker sees the game more clearly than the entrant. The King of Song was now an entrant. After what happened that day, Your Highness didn't go to the palace to visit the Holy Emperor? Wang Chong asked. The King of Song shook his head. I tried, but His Majesty rejected all of them. His Majesty doesn't see anyone now. In the past half a month, you are the first person His Majesty has met in the palace. I don't know if it's because of you, but today's court session is the longest that His Majesty has attended in the past half a month. We don't know if His Majesty will come to tomorrow's court session or how long he will last. The King of Song said with a face full of worry. At these words, Wang Chong's heart sank to the bottom of the lake. He remembered the distant sound that he had heard in the court. It sounded like a bell, but it wasn't a chime, Wang Chong heard this sound twice in a row. And every time this sound was heard, the Holy Emperor would leave in a hurry. Has it already come to this? Wang Chong's heart was heavy. If it were someone else, Wang Chong might think that it was something that could control their mind, or that there was some conspiracy in the palace. But this person was the Holy Emperor of the Tang dynasty, the supreme being of the Central Plains, the true sea-calming god of the whole divine continent. Even the most rebellious barbarians would show respect when talking about the Holy Emperor of the Tang dynasty. Wang Chong believed that there was no one who could control him. But Wang Chong glanced at the King of Song next to him, wanting to say something but hesitating. Only by looking into the future, far into the future, would one be able to understand what had happened at that time. However, at this moment, apart from himself, perhaps even the King of Song did not know what had happened to the Holy Emperor. No one could imagine the cost of failing in the god martial arts realm. Wang Chong did not know what was going on with the Holy Emperor, but it was clear that the situation was extremely bad. This was no longer a matter that concerned the Holy Emperor alone. It deeply affected all the people of the Central Plains. It was precisely after the Sage Emperor's reign that the Great Tang stepped into troubled times. What happened next? Your Highness should have seen Li Linfu. What did he say? Wang Chong took a deep breath, suppressed the uneasiness in his heart, and continued. The Prime Minister did not directly state it. He only said that he was judging the matter on its merits. However, when he spoke, he kept hinting that this was His Majesty's order. The King of Song said. The carriage immediately fell into deep thought. Wang Chong leaned against the carriage and frowned slightly. Wang Chong could roughly guess what the King of Song was thinking. The Holy Emperor was recognized as the greatest emperor throughout the ages. In terms of ambition to expand the territory, the Holy Emperor was even stronger than the King of Song. But it was precisely because of this that he felt conflicted and confused by Li Linfu's words. But Wang Chong would never believe Li Linfu's nonsense, not even a single word. Xiang, Fu, Your Highness, have you heard of a story? Wang Chong suddenly said. What? The King of Song blinked his eyes, greatly surprised. He did not expect that after what happened today, Wang Chong still had the mood to tell him a story. A fox assuming the tiger's might. Wang Chong smiled and said these 4 words. Oh! The King of Song's eyelids twitched. He took a deep look at Wang Chong, vaguely aware of something. But for a moment he could not think clearly. The fox borrows the tiger's prestige and is respected among the beasts. But a tiger is a tiger, and a fox is a fox. If one day, the tiger leaves the mountain, and the fox makes the beasts pay tribute, do you think this is the tiger's intention or the fox's? Buzz. The King of Song suddenly trembled. He stared at Wang Chong, his eyes extremely sharp. At that moment he seemed to understand something. Wang Chong only faintly smiled and quickly left the King of Song's carriage. The King of Song was a smart man, but he had been confused by appearances. Even Li Linfu could only fool him for a while, not for his entire life. Sooner or later, the King of Song would understand. Wang Chong hailed a carriage from the street and quickly returned home. The King of Foreign Land's residence was still under construction, and it would probably take another 3 or 4 months for it to be finished. The moment Wang Chong returned home, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. Normally, when he returned home, the maids and servants would gather together and make a racket, but this time it was all quiet. This was not a normal phenomenon. Wang Chong, you're back. Wang Chong had just stepped through the gate when a young voice, brimming with joy, came from up ahead. Wang Chong raised his head and saw a familiar figure, wearing the golden robe of a 4-clawed python. This figure was standing in front of the Wang clan's reception hall, silently waiting for him. Seeing him, the man looked excited and immediately strode toward him. Li Heng? Wang Chong frowned in surprise. The 5th prince was the dragon son of the Tang dynasty, and his every move was watched by countless people. Long ago, Wang Chong had advised him to be cautious, so Wang Chong normally would not go see him. This was the first time that the 5th prince had come to his home. Your Highness, why are you here? Wang Chong asked. I heard about what happened in Khorasan, so how could I possibly sit still? I already ordered them to inform me the moment you returned. It's great to see that you're fine. Li Heng said as he excitedly gave Wang Chong a bear hug. Feeling Li Heng's excitement and joy, Wang Chong couldn't help but feel a surge of warmth in his heart. Although he still did not approve of the 5th prince's somewhat reckless actions, Wang Chong had already sensed his intentions. Relax, I'm fine. Not even the deadly Azura battlefield was able to defeat me, much less a minor setback like this. Wang Chong indifferently said, Haha, I just knew that no one could defeat you. 5th Prince Li Heng happily said. He had an almost blind reverence for Wang Chong, as if there was nothing in the world that Wang Chong could not resolve. These bastards are just messing around. Without the protection of the army, can scholars fight? The 5th prince's face was filled with indignation. Come, this isn't the place to talk. Let's go in. Wang Chong quickly ushered the 5th prince Li Heng into the reception hall. Wang Chong waved his hand, and a maid immediately brought a table and tea. Only after the two were seated did Wang Chong have the time to examine the 5th prince. Compared to Wang Chong's impression of him, the 5th prince's complexion was clearly much better. Are you on the verge of breaking into the imperial martial realm? Wang Chong suddenly asked as he stared at the 5th prince. Li Heng was at first stunned, but then he smiled. King of Foreign Lands, you truly have a keen eye. Not long ago, Uncle Jing found me an ancient scroll that could conceal one's aura. He said that it could even fool great generals, but I didn't think that you would be able to see through it the moment we met. The 5th prince did not hide anything, taking a pastry from the table and putting it into his mouth, his entire body appearing relaxed and natural. 5th Prince Li Heng deeply trusted Wang Chong, so he did not hide anything in front of him. Wang Chong slightly creased his brow. The Uncle Jing that Li Heng spoke of was naturally that treacherous eunuch Li Jingzhong. It seemed that Li Jingzhong and Li Jingzhong had become much closer during the time he was away. But Wang Chong did not care. It would be fine if Li Jingzhong did his utmost to assist the 5th prince, but if Li Jingzhong showed any disloyalty, he would be dead. Your Highness will inherit the throne in the future, and it is not possible to do so without sufficiently powerful martial arts. Your Highness should work hard on your cultivation. I happen to have a few techniques that should be of use to you. That's right, Your Highness has personally come to pay a visit. Has something happened in the palace? Wang Chong suddenly asked. Nothing of the sort. Fifth Prince Li Heng shook his head. After what happened last time, no one in the palace dares to lightly provoke me, not even Big Brother. The fifth prince's words were tinged with pride, as well as gratitude toward Wang Chong. In the storm last time, the fifth prince had been exposed by the other princes for secretly practicing martial arts, and they had accused him of being extremely shrewd and deceiving the sovereign. But to their surprise, not only was the fifth prince fine, he even had the third prince, who had falsely accused him, sent to prison. This was completely different from the cowardly and easily bullied image of the fifth prince. Everyone was shocked, and the fifth prince's situation in the palace improved. Only fifth Prince Li Heng knew that this was all thanks to Wang Chong. However, if there's anything, it would be that I've discovered something recently, Li Heng suddenly said after a few moments of hesitation. Wang Chong's eyebrows shot up. Picking up the teacup on the table, he took a sip and gestured for Li Heng to continue. When that incident broke out, I also sent people to investigate, wanting to find out who was behind you. Although we weren't able to find anything in the end, we made an unexpected discovery. One time, when my people left the palace, they accidentally saw Prime Minister Li Linfu's carriage appear in the palace and drive into the first prince's palace. Although he had removed all his decorations and was doing his utmost to disguise himself, my people were still able to recognize him at a glance. Buzz! Li Heng's words caused Wang Chong's pupils to constrict and his entire body to pale. In his first morning court session, Wang Chong had already sensed that Li Linfu was colluding with King Qi and the Grand Preceptor, the three of them forming an invisible and powerful alliance. But Wang Chong had no idea that this matter was also connected to the first prince. If what the fifth prince's people said was true, this meant that the first prince, Li Linfu, King Qi, the Grand Preceptor, and the many civil officials of the court had already formed a powerful strategic alliance. This alliance extended from the harem and princes all the way to the imperial court. This was an unprecedentedly powerful force. At present, there was no force that could contend against it, including the alliance between the Wang clan and King Song. Not even the fifth prince Li Heng knew what he was saying. Chapter 1265. The First Prince. Wang Chong mentally muttered to himself as he recalled the first prince he had encountered near the city gate on his first visit to the emperor. It was no wonder that the first prince had appeared there that day, and it was no wonder that the resolution had been passed. But if the fifth prince was right, then everything could be explained. I understand this matter. For the time being, don't let anyone else know. In addition, be careful of the people at your side. Wang Chong said. Li Heng was dumbfounded by Wang Chong's final words. Wang Chong sighed and repeated the words the first prince had said before he left. Upon hearing that the first prince knew of his relationship with Wang Chong, Li Heng felt like he had been struck by lightning. How could this be? Li Heng's face instantly paled. He had believed that his relationship with Wang Chong was extremely secretive, but he had never imagined that it had been completely exposed to the first prince. More importantly, he understood Wang Chong's meaning. There was no doubt that the first prince had placed spies at his side. There are no walls in the world that can keep the wind out. The first prince has operated in the imperial palace for many years and is extremely skilled. It's already quite impressive that we were able to hide our secret from him until now, and now that it has been exposed, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Wang Chong said. But I don't even know who the spy he planted around me is. Moreover, I have just recruited a group of people. If I suddenly become suspicious and make wild guesses, it is very likely that it will cause panic and everyone will leave me. At that time, I will fall into Big Brother's trap. Fifth Prince Li Heng uneasily said. Even Wang Chong couldn't help but be stunned by these words. Your Highness, that was then and this is now. You truly have matured. Wang Chong sighed. If a normal person knew the truth, They would only panic and think about how to uncover that spy, but the fifth prince could still consider the effects of this matter. Just from this point alone, fifth prince Li Heng was completely different from before. As for the first prince planting a spy by your side, leave it to Li Jingzhong to handle. As long as you tell him about this, with his ability, I believe that he will definitely have a way to find those people. No one understood this traitorous eunuch's abilities better than Wang Chong. When it came to guessing at people's hearts, distinguishing between friend and foe, and spies, there was probably no one better than him. This was also the reason why Wang Chong had not gotten rid of him immediately and had kept him by the fifth prince's side. As long as he used it well, Li Jingzhong's strength would be even greater than 10 some imperial martial experts. Understood. I'll let Uncle Jing handle this matter when I get back. Li Heng sternly said. Right, there's one more thing. Wang Chong pondered for a moment before continuing. There's a eunuch in the palace called Niu Xiantong, and he's an attendant at His Majesty's side. With my status, it's very difficult for me to get in touch with him. When you go back, have Li Jingzhong help me make an appointment. I have something to discuss with him. All right. Fifth Prince Li Heng absent-mindedly said. No one would be able to remain calm when they knew that there was a spy at their side. Wang Chong knew that Li Heng's mind was elsewhere, so he said no more. A few moments later, he personally escorted fifth Prince Li Heng out through the back door. Once the fifth prince was gone, Wang Chong thought for a few moments and then quickly entered his study. The door to the study was closed, leaving behind only silence. Wang Chong leaned against his sandalwood chair, his hands clasped together, his eyes half closed, a pensive look on his face. Wang Chong was finding himself more and more fond of being alone and thinking when he encountered a major event. The first prince, Li Linfu King Qi, the Grand Preceptor. Just who is the true manipulator behind the curtain? The first prince? Li Linfu? Or all of them? Wang Chong's mind was in turmoil. In the last 2 days, he had slowly pieced together the truth of the imperial court and begun to sense the existence of his opponents. Some things had already happened and could not be changed, but he could at least prevent them from getting worse. As the room grew quieter and quieter, Wang Chong's thoughts began to move faster and faster. In the last few days, Wang Chong had been watching, listening, and thinking. As more and more information gathered, the fog before Wang Chong's eyes slowly began to clear up. It's not the Grand Preceptor. Wang Chong suddenly recalled the King of Song's words, and his eyes gradually turned sharp. The Grand Preceptor is old and has always been wise to protect himself. No matter how powerful he is, he can only mobilize the imperial court, not collude with the first prince. And it can't be King Qi. He doesn't have that much daring and he has quite a few generals under his command. Doing this won't do him much good. At some point, Wang Chong's fingers had parted. His right hand was placed on the table, his forefinger unconsciously tapping. With each tap, it gave off a clear sound, and his mind grew a little clearer. Li Linfu is extremely shrewd and smooth in his dealings, never revealing his true abilities. Such a high-profile style of doing things is not in line with his personality. As for the first prince, although he is the eldest son of the Holy Emperor's first wife and the #1 successor to the throne, before he truly inherits the throne, he doesn't have the ability to mobilize King Qi, the Grand Preceptor, and Li Linfu at the same time. But if it's not them, just who has the ability to mobilize 4 of the supreme figures of the court at the same time? Wang Chong slightly raised his head, his eyes staring at the ceiling of the study, his right forefinger tapping faster and faster on the table. Bang bang bang. The rapping was like a furious storm. Wang Chong had been made king of foreign lands and was already an extremely high official, but not even he could order around Li Linfu, the Grand Preceptor, or King Qi, these most illustrious figures of the Tang dynasty. But no matter who you are, you won't be able to hide for long. No matter what, I want you to reveal your true form, and of your own volition. Wang Chong's pupils constricted, and the rapping of his forefinger grew slower and slower, but stronger and stronger. In the end, he managed to knock a fingernail-sized hole into the hard sandalwood table. Time seemed to stop for a moment. Wang Chong's back was straight, his eyes sharp. The assault against the militarists this time was like a storm, fierce and incisive. The moment Wang Chong had left Khorasan, he had already begun to disband the armies of the protectorates. The Confucian scholars had entered the various ranks of the army, becoming army overseers and beginning to restrain the protectorate armies. All of this had happened far too quickly. It would have been impossible for there not to be someone directing everything from the shadows. And Wang Chong's goal was to find this person. In the last 2 or 3 days, Wang Chong had appeared to be very casual, either meeting with the Holy Emperor or attending the morning court session. But in reality, Wang Chong had been using his own method to observe everything and gather information. Waiting for death had never been his style, and Khorasan was too far from the capital for Wang Chong to reach, but now, it was time for him to strike. It's about time. After some time, Wang Chong lightly tapped his finger and turned his head to look out the open window. As if in response to Wang Chong's thoughts, 2 figures passed through the open window and appeared in Wang Chong's study. "Paying respects to your highness." A deep voice resounded through the study. The black-robed eagle and another figure were kneeling on the ground, their expressions reverent and respectful. The second figure was an extremely unfamiliar man, but based on his demeanor, he was clearly extremely respectful of the eagle and followed his every action. He was clearly a subordinate that the eagle had recruited. In the last half a year, the eagle had used his own methods to build a secret intelligence network. Not even Wang Chong could estimate how many people he had recruited. "How is it?" Wang Chong sat in his sandalwood chair, not even raising his head. "Your Highness, according to your Highness's orders, everything has been prepared. Everything you asked for is here." Old Eagle got down on one knee, and as he spoke, he took out a thick stack of files from his bosom and respectfully offered them with both hands. "Got it? Put it on the table. Don't leak anything about what happened today. Do you understand?" Wang Chong sternly said. "Your Highness." The eagle and his subordinate quickly left the study, and everything returned to normal. But a strange ripple was already beginning to spread through the capital. Time slowly passed and night fell. Even when it was late at night, Wang Chong still had not left the Wang family residence. "Let's go. It seems like he's already accepted his fate." 100 or so feet away from the Wang family residence, 2 figures slowly appeared from behind the eaves. With a leap, they quickly disappeared. The moon set and the sun rose. In the blink of an eye, it was the next day. When Wang Chong arrived at the imperial court and stood at the end of the line, he could clearly sense that the atmosphere today was completely different from usual. Many pairs of eyes would occasionally glance in Wang Chong's direction, a hint of fear in their eyes. The civil officials were no longer as overbearing as they had been yesterday. Whether it was Li Linfu or King Qi, they were much more restrained. As they stood in the imperial court, they did their utmost to avoid looking in Wang Chong's direction. As for the Grand Preceptor, who usually arrived early, he was very late this time, only appearing when the court session was about to begin. Moreover, he had a gloomy and nasty expression the entire time. After being ridiculed by Wang Chong yesterday, and in front of all the civil and military officials, the Grand Preceptor had no way of keeping his face. Anyone else might not have attended court for the next few days, but the Grand Preceptor would never do this. Even if he died, he would never admit that he had lost to a brat. While the atmosphere on the civil officials' side was stifling, the general's side was full of joy and the atmosphere was much more relaxed. Wang Chong's appearance had greatly reduced the pressure on the general's shoulders. They were no longer being suppressed by the Prime Minister, King Qi, the Grand Preceptor, and the civil officials. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.